Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is lifted up in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 25, Cure-All, Triumvirate. When they entered the huge cavern, No Mask slid to a stop in amazement. The sight of the red tower caught her eye first, its scarlet power an obvious stain on their world. Before she could examine it more closely, the room's other occupants took up all her attention. There were hollows, to be sure. But none of them reacted to their entrance. Which wouldn't have been surprising considering the effects of intimidation, except here they weren't moving at all. Suddenly Kappa wrenched away from her and raced across the room. "Hey!" she cried in dismay at losing contact, only to spot a moment later what had prompted him to do so. Near the base of the glowing tower, a boy she recognized as Noboru was raising his sword against an unfamiliar Shinigami who did the same. Their faces were blank, lifeless. Although the movements were sluggish, it was obvious they meant to kill one another. Gauntlets of bone white and dark violet encased the Kappa's arms. He powered over the stone, reaching the two moments before they could clash. Noboru aimed a lazy yet lethal blow at the female death god's throat. Kappa's right hand intercepted the blade mid-stroke and held on tight. When the other one attempted to impale Noboru through the heart, he caught that with his left hand, straining to hold them both back. No Mask quickly looked around. None of the hollows had moved. Were they under a spell? Must be some kind of defense mechanism. But it doesn't seem to work on us, maybe because we're human. Makes sense. We were told the magic around this place shouldn't harm the living. Unless we were misinformed. Or outright lied to. There has to be a way to shut the magic off. She studied the malevolent spire from top to bottom in search of any indication as to its function. Short of destroying it, we might. In the shadows of the ceiling, a glint of blue caught her eye, and when she focused on it, three voices spoke to her. After this, No Mask forgot everything but the need to obey. Kappa struggled to hold the blades from reaching their targets. In desperation he looked back to where his partner stood. Rather than coming to his aid, however, she remained in the same spot as before. Her head was tilted up, body unnaturally still, as though absorbed in studying the mighty tower above him. He looked up to do the same, and so stared into the blue eye of Triumvirate. Obey. At this, Sato Chad Yasutara found himself drifting in an ever-changing world. Promises were made to him there, touching upon his most deeply held desires and hopes. He need only slay the ones around him. Can I do that? Yes, of course I can. But my abuelo told me, no need to worry, it will all work out. I can even bring him back this way. Abuelo, my parents, everybody. This is how I make the world right. Chad heard a child calling for their mother. When he turned his head, he saw Rukia Kukaki. I have to kill her. Kyujaku and Kuniedatu. How sad. Rukia walked through a fog, without purpose. It felt as though a great deal of time passed in this way, yet no progress was made. Clarity came swiftly once she considered her situation. Another dream. Probably Aizen again. Bad enough he can reach me this way, but I never remember it until I return here. Could that be a result of Cloud over Moon? I wonder what he wants to talk about now. The fog lifted, but Aizen did not present himself. Instead, she was standing in a pastoral setting. Flowers of all colors and varieties spread out across gently rolling hills. The sky was lit gold and red by a setting sun. People clustered amongst the swells. There was Noboru, and Lieutenant Kotetsu. A smattering of hollows loitered about doing nothing. The sight was so strange she found herself uncertain whether this was Aizen's doing at all. In her experience, he preferred a theme to his dream paintings. Even as she thought this, the monster floating at the center of this illusion claimed all her attention. Do our bidding, and inaugurate a new world in the making. Rukia grew panicked at hearing the triple-eyed machine speak. It sounded so familiar. Like Aizen, actually no, not really. More like his Zanpakuto, come to think of it. She rarely makes an appearance when we're here, preferring to hide in the background. Only speaks up if I let slip an unflattering comment about the environment. Kyoka Suijutsu did not respond well to criticism. Almost as scary as her master, that one. As Rukia watched, Noboru and Kian unsheathed their swords and behaved as though about to strike one another. But their movements were off, almost like actors in a play. Is that what we're watching? A performance of some kind? It felt dangerous all the same. As she tensed to intervene, both blades abruptly halted before they could make contact. Rukia breathed a sigh of relief. That was close. Mama. She glanced down to find little Jaka clutching at her hand, those small fingers tightly encasing her own. Had he been here the whole time? With eyes full of tears her son stared at the halted execution. No wonder. That was scary. Must be just as confused by all this as me. Trust us. Obey us. Revere us. The titanic mechanism continued to proselytize. Everyone else was staring at it as though enraptured. They're under some kind of spell. I wonder why I'm not affected? Suddenly she noticed they had been joined by two other familiar people. Kuniya Darayo and Chad Yasutara appeared nearby. Both possessed that same empty-headed expression as the others. It was positively surreal. What's next? Yumi Chika floating in on a cloud dressed like a Greek god. Deus ex machina. That's Latin, Kisuk taught me. How much stranger can this get? Right then one of the hollows drew its sword and promptly beheaded another standing beside it. At this, Kyojaka screamed. Automatically Rukia grabbed him into her arms. She rose up whispering assurances and turned to find everyone looking at them. Even the monster. It was almost embarrassing. What? Next thing the Shinigami maiden knew she was scrambling to reach her son's room where he sat up abed howling in terror. He threw himself into his mother's arms and fell to weeping piteously. Ichigo came stumbling after her, his broken leg preventing him from moving quickly. Another bad dream. Yes. She responded, and both strove to soothe their son before his cries could wake his sister. That panicked shriek brought Ryo out of her trance. The landscape was spinning around like a bowl wobbling on its base, but she did not move with it. Only then did it dawn on her there were others here. A brief glimpse of Rukia Kukaki holding what might be her child disappeared as soon as she looked at them. Chad, the Shinigami, Hollows, and Kuniada spotted the horrific entity triumvirate hanging in the sky, gazing intently at the spot where Rukia had previously occupied. Then it blinked, as though realizing something, and the triple-eyed guardian swung back to focus on them once more. Instinct took over, and in a flash Kuniada activated intimidation. No. She jumped. For a moment the whole world seemed to expand like a balloon, and her along with it. Then they contracted back so fast she almost collapsed. All she could hear was a babble of conflicting voices. It is him. Yamamoto. He is right there, he is going to kill me. What is there to fear? I see nothing. Is this some manner of illusion? The old man is not present. He is. That monster. No, don't. Please, I was loyal, I beg you. It cannot be, he is dead. Dead forever. This is an attack of some kind. I must surrender. Otherwise he will kill me. Show mercy, I beg before no one. Begone ere I find you. Triumvirate reared madly about. There was no time to waste. Kuniada raced to where Chad still appeared dazed by all this. I don't know how much longer my hold will last. This place might not allow me to fully utilize my power. Or that triumvirate thing could be more than one person, it certainly sounds that way. I have to reach him before it can get a grip on us again. The illusory world fractured around them before she could. With a sudden start No Mask found herself back in the musty ill-lit cavern. The sound of triumvirate still arguing with itself continued, and she spotted its eyes flashing wildly up towards the ceiling. Seems I've got it by the balls. That was one problem out of the way. The Hollows would doubtless soon attack each other and the two Shinigami. Before that happens, I need to get their attention and... A form passed through the wall of the cavern. It landed without a sound and rose upright. For a moment it appeared to squirm like a shadow cast by flickering torchlight. When it resolved, a curious silence fell over the room, broken only by triumvirate pleading in the background. Even No Mask's heart labored when she realized the new intruder's identity. Black wings spread out with a rustle as Ulquiorra Schiffer in Segunda Etapa form scanned the room. His heartless green gaze lingered on No Mask, making her flinch. Of course he can see me, he's not permitted to be a threat. But if he's only thinking about killing me and can't, would intimidation still work on him? I've never actually tested that. You're the Cuarta Espada. One of the hollows slurred. Ulquiorra Schiffer. Another Arrancar peered uncertainly at the Vastolord. Are you sure? I can't feel him. Is this another dream? Why dash? That was as far as he got, as the Bat Demon slipped up behind him. One wing swept out to bisect the hollow. Another made a move, whether to retreat or attack, and was cut down in an instant by a flick of the black tail. A single heartbeat later, and all of the remaining hollows were dead. No Mask sucked in a trembling breath. This was not the first time she had witnessed the Espada's ability. It always came with the immense relief that he was currently on their side. Right then the bloodied remains of the hollow pack underwent a sudden change. Their bodies became transparent, tinged with a red tint, losing all shape in the process. These globs of concentrated spirit were sucked heavenward to coalesce around the topmost point of the spectral lighthouse that still dominated this room. There they were sucked into it without a sound. So that is the heart of the mountain. Oh. Across the way the female Shinigami had fallen to her knees. Her face was white with terror, huge eyes riveted on the motionless Ulquiorra. Her sword lay on the ground, and when she reached to retrieve it, her hands shook so badly they couldn't even get a grip. Noboru leapt to stand protectively in front of her, his soul cutter transforming into a red gold-tipped pole as he did. Run, the brown-skinned youth spoke calmly to everyone left in the room. I'll hold him here. His voice did not tremble, yet still a sheen of sweat covered his whole body. It's all right, Kappa called out. He can't hurt us. Can't hurt us. Noboru spit between clenched teeth, never taking his eyes off the impassive Espada. More accurate to say he won't hurt us, No Mask supplied. When Ulquiorra remained in the same spot without attacking, the young Shinigami finally tore his attention loose to focus on her. And who are you supposed to be? His gaze drifted over Kappa and No Mask. A frown caused his brow to crease. Wait a sec, don't I know you? Ulquiorra-sama. All turned to find the hollow priest from before standing in the sacrificial hall's entrance. No Mask sought to bring him under her influence again, but he didn't even look her way. All his attention was riveted on the Espada. It is I, Ein Vogel. How came you to be here? Has Lord Aizen sent you? Where is he? Noboru regarded this new arrival speculatively. He took a moment to survey his allies, then rounded on Vogel with a merciless sneer. Looks like the odds are on our side this time, Pelado. He threw a quick glance at Ulquiorra. Unless you want to take this one out too. I am here to retrieve the items left behind by Grimjo, the archfiend declared in a flat voice. Green eyes surveyed the humans and Shinigami with soulless dispassion. My orders were not to kill any of you. However, that does not preclude you dying by other means. In other words, I am under no further obligation to assist you. He then folded his arms and stepped back against the wall. Whoever dies will improve our acquisition. They all stared at him. Yet when Schiffer continued to do nothing, at a nod from No Mask, Kappa began to advance on the lone hollow, with Noboru falling in behind. The other Shinigami was moving to recover her sword, dividing her attention between Ulquiorra and the skeletal priest. No Mask moved to join her. It was clear neither of them were fighters. Intimidation wouldn't be much help once the battle started. But it could still keep the two of them safe. The priest took a step back and lifted his staff overhead. Lord Ulquiorra. I will not fail you. He twirled the weapon around his knuckles, the metal rings in its head sending up a clashing song. Illuminate. Noboru's power pole lashed out quick as a flash, and Kappa pumped his right arm in a jab to unleash a roaring Viridian blast. Vogel knocked the head of the staff aside with his free hand to send it shooting past his cheek, completing resurrection a moment before the fireball hit. Boda. Spiritual strength exploded at the same time Kappa's shot connected. No Mask was knocked back. The hollow bug on her shoulder shrieked as it was torn apart by the outpouring of power. Instantly the room was plunged into darkness from her view. No Mask blinked against the after-images swimming before her eyes. She crouched down in an effort to minimize the risk of being hit by a stray shot, casting about for some way to reorient herself. Then it occurred to her that, even without light, the various spirits and arcane implements were still clearly visible to her second sight. Well, of course, not like ghosts can even interact with light particles. But I still can't see the living. The conflagration from her partner's attack hadn't even died down when Ein Vogel swam through it. Heedless of the flames, this new figure resembled the statue of a Buddha, clad from head to foot in golden robes. His skin had turned yellow, and the ringed staff from before was now a large golden Dharma chakra floating at his back. The hollow boasted 8 arms, 4 on each side, all raised save for 2 that were clapped before it in an attitude of permanent prayer. A hollow hole now revealed itself in his chest. Vogel's face was stripped of his mask remnants, but both eyes were now closed, and when he lifted his head and spoke his voice had a resonant, peaceful quality completely at odds with his frantic speech from before. Narayan Astra, he sang sweetly, giving a negligent flick of one bracelet wrist as he did. The rain of flaming arrows. Red light burst above No Mask just as the Shinigami beside her leapt up with both hands raised overhead. Bakudo number 81, Danku. Her incantation finished just in time. With an endless rumble, fiery projectiles began to cascade down. A hand's breadth long and numerous as raindrops, these searing implements would have turned both mortal and Shinigami to ash. A few yards above them, however, the arrows collided against some type of invisible surface where they burst apart. No Mask stared amazed while beside her the Shinigami was mumbling another chant. Cracks appeared in the shield wall, but as the incantation left her lips, the barrier seemed to grow stronger and held anew against this assault. Remembering their predicament, No Mask cast about for their comrades. She could faintly see now thanks to the barrage. Kappa had dropped to one knee and raised his warding arm overhead. In response a large black shield grew out that protected him from the storm like an umbrella. As for Noboru, at first she couldn't find him, and for a moment feared the worst. But then something flickered in the corner of one eye, only to vanish when she turned her head. It happened again, and again, each time leaving only a brief impression that might have been the Shihoan prince. Is he dodging them all? Grief, that kid is fast. The sight of Ulquiorra still lounging casually against the wall made her teeth grind. He had raised one wing to act as a shield much as her partner had done, but even that was probably just for show. She highly doubted anything that multi-limbed prick had in his arsenal could even lay a scratch on Schiffer. For all the good that did them at this point. She returned her attention to the attacking hollow. He floated along towards them with legs tucked beneath him in a lotus pose, arms weaving in and out to draw invisible patterns in the air. That tranquil, dreamy look never left his face, and he still hadn't opened his eyes. No Mask cursed. Intimidation might do the trick now, but he actually had to look at her for that to work. As if to make up for this, the Kappa got to his feet. Uttering a defiant roar he charged at the hovering hollow. With right arm still protecting him from the deluge, he clenched his left fist and drew back to strike. Vogel made no effort to avoid him, only smiled peacefully. With a shout Kappa sent his spiked arm cannon plowing into the Arrancar's face. At the same time, Noboru's power pole launched out of nowhere from behind and collided with the back of his head. There was no reaction. Vogel didn't go flying, nor did he even flinch at the destructive force behind that punch, which No Mask knew to be awesome. No force in existence can harm me, he reproached them in almost compassionate tones. For I know that the universe is naught but an illusion created to obfuscate our ascendance to a higher plane. Our own base urges shackle and constrain us. Yet they are no more substantial than an errant thought. Those heavy-lidded eyes drifted open, and a contented smile played about his buck-toothed lips. Join me, now, on the path to true enlightenment. On one of his hands a lotus pod suddenly opened. Light poured forth, too strong to look at directly. No Mask swung away before it could blind her. But she already had everything she needed. The girl turned her back on the approaching hollow and ripped her shirt off, exposing the stylized black dragon tattoo crowding every inch of skin from spine to shoulder blades. Its wrathful eyes blazed as they opened to focus on the approaching threat. In response, Vogel simply shook his head. The clumsy paintings of a child. No mere symbol can ensnare me now. All the mysteries of the universe are laid bare at my feet. That which is seen, that which is felt or heard, is merely a trick of the mind. Only by attaining enlightenment can one achieve utter peace, freed from the shackles and pains inflicted by a false world. He continued to advance. No mask could detect his sanctimonious prattle coming closer, yet couldn't move to escape. The firestorm would kill her if she left this protective enclosure. What was left for them to try? Unable to open her eyes, she only heard when the Shinigami beside her stood and said, "Whisper, Omasea." Seen, felt, or heard? Yeah. I'm hoping that too, Pell. Kian Kotetsu got to her feet. A casting of Bakudo No. 8, Seiki across both eyes acted to protect her from the light show. She leveled a dire glare at the approaching hollow, dipping the point of her sword at the ground. Whisper, Omasea. The weapon blazed to reveal its true state. Short and bearing a rounded tip, Omasea's blade now resembled a plain Roman gladius more than any oriental weapon. It distinguished itself by boasting a long vertical slit that hollowed out the steel from top to bottom. Sentaro snidely referred to it as the potato peeler. And she had to admit there was a resemblance to that vintage implement. Time to show our stuff. Ha! Her sword cut through the air. Hi-ya! And again. Ho! Ha! Hi-ya! To anyone watching, it might have looked as though she were dancing. Or at worst, posturing to try and intimidate her opponent. Kian pranced and spun about the small safe space created by her Danko spell, swinging her weapon wildly and, by all appearances, uselessly. Vogel continued in his advance. To her relief she saw Noboru was still alive. Unable to avoid the fire arrows while being blinded, he had sought cover under Ulquiorra's wing, of all places. The vampire lord shot him a look filled with animus, but the monkey prince ignored him. Pretty bold, trusting in Ulquiorra's statement that he wasn't allowed to hurt them. From the looks of it the kid was casting a spell. Kaya! HOH! Whoa! Kian nearly fell flat on her ass when a mighty roar presaged Vogel being engulfed in a titanic blast of energy. If she didn't know better she might have thought the Espada had reneged on his declaration and let loose a Ciro Oscurus. Hado No. 78, Zhang Aaron, by the look of it. And not an ounce of power spared. But Noboru's spell, fully incanted, or not, still did the hollow mage no harm. Kappa Mask came staggering towards them once the blast died out. His valiant efforts halted when a rope flew from one of Vogel's hands and wrapped around his throat. The big bruiser was lifted off his feet to swing in the air, choking even as he sought to keep from being struck by the burning rain. As the noose of Yama strangled 108 sinners in a single heartbeat, so now I bid you enter the land of the dead, Ein intoned solemnly. The girl in the no mask looked about to spring forward and hurl herself on Vogel come what may. To prevent this Kian tackled her, and they fell to wrestle against one another. Stay down! She gasped, ignoring the human's ineffectual blows. Hope that was enough. At this point Vogel had finally reached their holdout. He examined the struggling women with a sort of fond dismay. All suffering derives from desire, and existence is suffering. By denying existence, I am freed from all suffering. Your very existences are meaningless to me. Kian looked up at him from her place on the floor. Just get it over with, you empty-headed ass, she growled. Vogel shook his head. Allow me to relieve you of all doubts. A spinning Sudarshana appeared in the palm of one hand, and with another he reached down. A foot away from touching her, his fingers came off. For a moment all Ein Vogel did was stare, as though uncertain what just happened. It was possible he hadn't even felt it. Then blood gushed from the stumps. And the hollow shaman's face contorted on a horrific shriek. He collapsed to the floor, still screaming. Multiple arms flailed as he thrashed around. In doing so more cuts opened along his limbs, drawing further howls from the thoroughly dethroned Buddha. One hand was actually half severed at the wrist. This succeeded in freeing the Kappa, letting him drop to the floor. He tore the noose free and lay coughing. Kian grinned at the sight of her fallen opponent. You don't have to actually hear a rumor for it to hurt you, she declared triumphantly. In response Vogel let out a shriek and lunged for her. He halted halfway there as deep gashes appeared all over his body. 2 of his extra arms were chopped off, and the false chakra at his back was cut to ribbons. With a gurgle the stricken sorcerer collapsed. At that moment he reverted to the form which they first saw him, still covered in wounds and missing all the fingers on his right hand. The rain of arrows halted, the blinding light dying with it. "Not yet," she told No Mask when the girl seemed about to move. The sandy-haired imp looked around the cleared space in satisfaction. Visible only to her eyes were dozens and dozens of slim glowing lines. The cuts left by Amasea hung neatly in space where she had left them, a hidden death trap any unsuspecting enemy would walk into. Kian could pick up the cuts and handle them as though they were daggers, but otherwise they did not move. To anyone else it would appear as though they had been sliced open by the air. For that reason she referred to this technique as Kama Itaki, deadly as the invisible demons of Japanese lore. It worked. Yeah. I figured his trick only defended against attacks that he himself perceived. Anything Vogel failed to see, feel, or hear didn't exist as far as he was concerned, and so he couldn't guard against them. The limitations of enlightenment, couldn't see what was right under his nose. You want I should chop off his nose? No, I think that's enough for now. Suit yourself. Amasea changed back into the appearance of a plain sword. In doing so all his cuts disappeared as well. She made a sign to Noboru indicating it was safe to approach. He zipped over to give her a pat on the shoulder, then moved to take up guard over the fallen Vogel, his weapon Hanuman ready to squash the hollow should he so much as twitch. Sheathing her sword, Kian bent and helped No Mask to stand. The girl retrieved her shirt, and together they walked over to where the Kappa was clambering to his feet. All's well that ends well, Well, you know what I think? Without a sound, Triumvirate dropped between them. Its eyes were fully open. Obey. No one moved. Kian and Noboru stared into the furiously flashing orbs that lit their faces in primary colors. No Mask stood frozen, unable to activate her intimidation in time. Ulquiorra too remained in the same position as before, though whether this was due to having fallen under the golem's spell or simply not caring about the result remained unclear. Slay your enemies. Slay them all. Obey us, and we shall make your fondest dreams come true. Kian drew her blade once more. Behind her Noboru raised his staff to smash Vogel's skull. Kappa lifted a trembling hand, forming a white armored glove at the same time. His fist drifted around in front of him. The red eye opened to bathe them all in blood. Slay. Kappa's fist shot forward into that crimson orb. A great cry rent the air as the eye split, and Triumvirate hurled itself skyward with a screech. It twisted back and forth, howling like mad in a single voice now. The gear spun wildly around, sparks flying from its edges. Glowing cracks appeared all over its surface. For the briefest moment a huge skull-like motif flashed upon the hole in the gear. Then Triumvirate shattered into pieces that faded even as they fell, wailing in its death throes. Lamuerd had claimed another victim. No Mask and the 2 Shinigami stood stunned. After a while Kian mumbled, "How did you do that? I couldn't move, or even think." The burly mortal flexed his fingers as though they were numb. "I can't see." He waved a hand in front of his mask. "That skinny octopus blinded me. But I could still hear. So I punched where I thought the voice was coming from." He took an unsteady step forward. "Could someone help me around?" No Mask moved swiftly to take his hand. "Here. I'll guide you." "Let me help." Kian trotted over and began pawing about her uniform. "I'm a medical mage, we're trained to heal the effects of hollow curses. Just gimme a minute and I'll have you back to fighting metal in no tea. Yo. Check it out." At Noboru's shout they all turned to look. It was soon clear what he meant. The great tower of magic that defined Anohana's ages-old curse was crumbling, glowing beams and ligaments unhooking like frayed cloth. Its spire sagged down as the spell dispersed and the seed pod split. Revealed within was a large jug resembling a Greek amphora. "Don't worry, I got this one," Noboru called. He aimed Hanuman at the falling object. Before anyone could protest this rash action, Ulquiorra Schiffer shot across the way and caught the power pole's tip in one hand. "Hey!" Noboru protested. "Lego, Vampiro." You will not destroy it, the Espada stated calmly. It is the reason I am here. The Shihoan prince continued to struggle ineffectually. But as he did, Ein Vogel suddenly scrambled up and dove for the falling jar. Qian cursed and was just aiming a Kido spell at him when Ulquiorra moved to intervene between them again. In this time, Vogel had grasped his prize. He spun around, grinning like a madman, then awkwardly raised the flask and began to gulp down the contents. It splashed and spattered over his robes, dripping everywhere. Schiffer regarded this disgusting procedure but made no move to stop it. After just a few seconds, Ein flung the empty amphora away to roll across the floor. Ha! He screamed, clapping his maimed hand beneath an armpit. It is done. Within me I now contain both the essence of Vastolord and all the souls we have hunted low these many years. You. He leveled a trembling finger to point at Ulquiorra. Espada. I have become the vessel which Aizen-sama sent you to retrieve. You must protect me, and permit me to leave this prison alive. I command it. Schiffer's horned head cocked to one side. For a moment it seemed he was considering vaporizing the haughty Arrancar where he stood. Then the pallid demon turned to regard the other group present. So be it. Vogel uttered a cackle and bobbed clumsily out of the chamber. A lunge in his direction by Noboru was preempted once again by the Quarta Espada. Do not interfere, Ulquiorra droned in his emotionless voice. Though not permitted to harm, I can still impede. Your efforts would meet with certain failure. Qian considered this. It certainly made sense. She moved to place a hand on Noboru's arm, squeezing slightly to get his attention, and shook her head. The quivering prince threw a frustrated look at her, then gave a snarl and strode back to where Kappa and No Mask crouched. As if satisfied at this decision, Ulquiorra moved to follow Vogel, disappearing as he did. For her part, Qian took a moment to make sure the curse surrounding this mountain was indeed vanished. The death of Triumvirate must have done the trick. They were safe to call for help. With that she imparted all necessary information to a hell butterfly and sent it winging off to Soul Society. Then she went to tend the Kappa. Although their allegiance was still circumspect, Qian knew it would take all the help they could get to rescue her captured comrades. Sentaro, you better not have died on me. What's the deal? Sentaro asked sharply. Are you with the Hollows or us? And why is a human involved in this anyway? The Tenga rolled her shoulders in what might have been a shrug. We're all involved, big fella. It's not just Hollows and Shinigami. Us mortals want a chance to have our voices heard. We like to kick a little butt too. Before he could retort, a spike in negative energy caused Sentaro's head to snap to one side. The hell is that? Relax, his inscrutable cohort told him. My people are over there. Even if they can't handle it, the help I sent a while ago will be more than enough. He regarded her with a frown. I want to go check on my men. And I want you to keep trying to open that gate. She cocked a thumb over her shoulder at the portal. Trust me, your people are fine. The best thing you can do for them now is figure out a way you all can leave this place. Assuming we can't break the mountain's spell, that door is your only ticket to freedom. Aside from killing each other. The co-second seat of Heron wasn't sure what she meant by that, but suspected he didn't want to find out. So instead he occupied himself for a few minutes studying the tangled mass of roots shaping a portico. This proved no more productive than his initial findings had been. However, while bent on this task, he didn't fail to notice when the surge in hollow power from before abruptly dipped to near imperceptible levels. See? Told you they'd win, the Tengu affirmed happily. Sentaro wasn't quite so blasé about their situation, but he continued to make an effort at understanding the spell structure. This strange woman continued to perplex him. Was she really an ally, or some kind of mercenary? She certainly had the attitude of a hired gun. As if little about their predicament affected her. Was she crazy? Not firing on all cylinders, for sure. But for the time being we're on the same page. I'd feel a lot better if she'd explain her intent more clearly. She won't even tell me her name. Little things like that can wait for later. You've got a job to do. I suppose so. Can you contact any of the others and Pakuto yet? No dice. Too much distance. Then we'll have to think of some other way to gain the upper hand. Right. What could go wrong? When Ulquiorra Schiffer slid through the wall a moment later, Sentaro nearly soiled himself. The presence of the all-powerful vampire lord of Hueco Mundo nearly prevented him from noticing the much smaller and significantly more messed up hollow that came with him. The bald spirit was covered in blood and slime. He looked like a flayed pig at market. When his beady eyes focused on Sentaro and the human, he gave a startled gasp and cringed back. "Protect me." The Tengu slowly rose to a standing position. "What's the deal?" she asked lightly. "He has eaten it," the Espada replied. "We must see to his protection for the time being. Resound, Odeko." Even as Sentaro released his soul cutter, the Espada moved to intercept him, standing betwixt the Shinigami and the cowering hollow. Katsubaki swallowed back bile that burned his throat. Although he couldn't sense the creature's presence, there was absolutely no doubt in his mind that this was the real deal. Could that be what the girl sent to help her colleagues? No wonder she seemed confident. No, on top of all that. What the heck is going on? That's my line. As Schiffer continued to be menacing, the hairless hollow scuttled past and approached the gate. "Must get out," he muttered feverishly. "Must get out." He swiped a hand down the web of constrictive magic across the portal's open pane. Immediately the green lines dissolved, and just like that the gate sprang open. With a glad squeal the wounded ghost made to pass into it. "Guess that makes him ein Vogel." "Yeah, but hold on a second. Didn't Diego say it wouldn't open without a key? Maybe he's already got one. Or maybe... Shit. Hit the dirt." Huh? Even as he thought this, a black-clawed hand burst from the portal right in Vogel's face. He stumbled and fell with a startled yelp. Sentaro nearly joined him as a result of the noxious spiritual energy that came washing out with it. The hell? He got his answer as more emerged, until an armored figure stood before them illuminated by the throbbing gate. Moments later it winked out, leaving their new arrival peering around in dazed fashion. "Gree." Vogel choked out, huddled in on himself. "Grimjo." Grimjo Jaggerjax, the former Sexta Espada, barely noticed his pack-mate. Narrow turquoise eyes roamed about, pausing only on spying Ulquiorra before returning to confront his quivering underling. Sentaro could only stare at this nightmare risen from the grave. After a moment he realized something startling. The hollow hole in Grimjo's navel, it was huge. The cavity now took up most of his torso. It didn't seem possible he could stand upright looking like that, much less be alive in the first place. What in heaven's name happened to him? Of a sudden Ein scrambled upright. "Begone!" he squealed, flapping robed arms up and down as though trying to disperse the apparition before him. "You are a myth. A vision. It is I who shall claim the title of Vastolord, not you. The power you stole dwells safe within me. None may take it from me. And I..." He got no further, as a feral grin flickered over Jaggerjack's mouth. Black claws lashed out to seize his treacherous follower by the throat. Vogel struggled to break this iron grip in vain. Lips smeared with gore, he twisted his head to mouth silent pleas for help to Ulquiorra. When it was the Tengu who moved forward, Schiffer held up a restraining arm before her. She frowned at him, but chose not to press any further. Grimjo wasted no further time. He drew the teary-eyed face of his treacherous comrade close, opened fanged jaws wide as could be, and bit down. Crunch. Nasty. Sentaro wrenched his head away before he had to witness any more. All the same, the sounds that accompanied it would haunt him forever. He nearly threw up, praying for it to be over quickly. And in that much, he got his wish. For just a few seconds later there came a smacking sound, and when he dared to look, Grimjo now stood alone. Blood smeared down his chin and chest, dripping past the unnatural emptiness of his torso. When he took a step forward, Ulquiorra did the same to regard him with a menacing expression. At this the panther demon hesitated, only to flash a bloody smirk in return. He then drew back a pace. Behind him the gate roared to life once more, and Grimjo slipped into it, smiling all the while. "See you later," he hissed, and was gone. The portal shut behind him. While attempting to explain the situation to her fellow Shinigami, Kian was relieved to turn and see Sentaro Katsubeki coming towards them. She raced over, drawing to a halt upon spotting the masked Tengu at his back sporting a lone black wing and feathers all over its arms. "It's a long story," her old drinking buddy explained before any questions could be asked. "Right back at you." She accompanied him to rejoin their squad while casting suspicious looks at the bird demon. Kappa and No Mask drew apart to join this eerie figure, and they shared stories in soft voices. "Did you send for help?" Kian asked. "No. You?" "Huh. Yes. They should be arriving any minute." "I see." She was troubled by how subdued he seemed. Sentaro crossed over to address the force of mages and cleanup experts. "How many did we lose?" "None, sir," an officer from Heron's squad spoke up. "They might have intended to eat us at some point, but that one over there," she indicated the Tengu, "came to our rescue. As far as I can tell, she killed them all." "We found Anohana's lair," Kian piped up, inserting herself both physically and verbally between them. "There was a trap, some hypnotizing murder bot called Triumvirate, but we killed it and that broke the spell. Then Ulquiorra Schiffer showed up and..." Here she seemed to realize something and scooted closer. "Hey, did you happen to spot him? Or a bald Aaronkar traveling with him?" "He's dead. Vogel, not Schiffer. Him she, absorbed, or ate somehow." He flicked a hand over at where the Tengu stood, and then gave a startled oath. The three masked humans had vanished. "Where'd they go? Did anybody see? Only took my eyes off them for a second and they were..." Kido mages argued with Heron soldiers and each other about the exact order of events. Further parts, Kian and Sentaro exchanged a look, and with weary nods they both sat down. Neither had the strength to bicker or lay blame at this moment. Best now to get their stories straight for the inevitable debriefing that would result from this affair. And to say they were not looking forward to that would be an understatement. "How'd it go?" "We found the goods, but some loser hollow ate it. Then Grimjo ate him and split. Why do I get the feelin' there's more to that story?" Ulquiorra didn't think it was a good idea to follow. He said there was a chance Grimjo was it, the point of no return, he called it. "Well, can't say I'm over the moon at this result. Did JA at least clean the place out? The thing guarding the mountain took everything with it when it died. So you know, I'm a little pissed off you didn't warn us about that. My people could have been hurt." "Our people, sweetheart. We're all in this together. And you know I woulda let you in on the details if I knew about M. I had faith you could handle whatever the old witch threw at ya." "Whatever. I've got training camp in an hour. Don't call unless it's urgent." "Rightio. Till next time, Emuto-chan." She ended the call with a distasteful grimace. "What did he say?" "The usual." Tatsuki Arisawa got back in bed and slipped under the covers. She settled against his bare chest, troubled eyes gazing into the distance. "They might have figured us out, you know." Ryo said Noboru nearly recognized her. "It wouldn't take much to put two and two together." "It's okay," he soothed reassuringly, placing a kiss atop her spiky black crown as he did. "Just tell them about what you've been doing these past few months. How you've been hunting down all of Anohana's Jigai. That should satisfy them. There were 2 in Peru after all, right?" 3, she corrected him. "And I guess that could work. But if they find out about me, they'll understand and support you, because they're your friends," he spoke calmly and assuredly. "You can't help what you've got inside you. An ick factor aside, it's pretty handy when you get right down to it. Speaking of things inside me..." She rolled over and straddled her lover with a fiery grin. "I've got an hour before camp. And you're the best warm-up I know." At this, Khan heaved a much aggrieved sigh. "The things I do for Olympic gold," and drew her down for a kiss. Lieutenant Kian Katetsu and Co-Lieutenant Sentaro Katsubeki stood at attention in a meeting chamber of Greyhound Division. Arrayed behind a long desk in front of them were 6 of the 7 captains of Siriti. "Tell us more about your findings," Urahara Kisuke of Ibis Company lazed in his chair with an indolent smile. "What were your personal conclusions?" Lieutenant Katetsu spoke up first. "Sir. After further examination, we concluded there was no way to reactivate the gate. When Captain Adolschwank destroyed one side and Einvogel blocked the other, Grimjo must have been caught between dimensions. How he survived all this time is a mystery. But since he willingly went back through, we suspect there was another exit he knew of that we did not. Or he was just suicidally insane, she quickly added and stepped back to allow Sentaro to speak. Her gruff ally cleared his throat before proceeding. Sirs and ma'ams. There is little doubt Lieutenant Katetsu's initial supposition was correct, the mountain was manufactured to produce Vastolord. While some dispute the obvious. He threw a scowl at Kian, who resolved to drink him under the table for that comment later. We believe Anohana had been harvesting the souls of human sacrifices from the region of Mesoamerica for centuries. Quickly Kian interrupted before he could continue. Certain hieroglyphics within the mountain point to an ancient goddess called Itzpapalotl who instructed her worshippers on how to carry out certain rituals. The spell she crafted could be aimed to collect souls in regions far distant from its main location, thus preventing anyone from locating the actual source. In addition, Kotsubeki thundered, there is strong evidence Aizen Sosuke lived in that same mountain for centuries. In fact, Kian slipped adroitly in front of him, after analyzing what remained of the spell, and listening to my first-hand account, some of our mages have theorized the infant Sosuke Takayaka was subjected to the same soul concentration process we observed taking place within the mountain, which might explain his incredible power. The big lump jumped ahead of her, which would indicate that Anohana returned to the installation after abandoning it following the disaster with the Kenpeka several centuries prior. But we suspect this was not the first time she had done so, considering the similarities to that incident and the Black Plague in medieval Europe, which Anohana herself personally investigated. At this time, we suspect the Kenpeki and her crew were killed in the process of fashioning a Vastolord, who may or may not be one of those we have already identified. If that does prove to be the case, we also cannot rule out that another Vastolord was produced from the Black Plague. And furthermore, would you stop interrupting me, you thundering oaf? I'm trying to relay the facts, while you're just spinning tall tales as usual. Flighty rumor monger. Blathering ape. Drunk. Womanizer. Enough. Lord Commander Byakuya Kukaki's stern voice cut through their argument like a blade. The two officers snapped back to rigid attention, faces red as they strained to keep further insults from spewing out. Byakuya settled back with a frown. Not for the first time it occurred to both of them that had they previously worked under any command other than Captain Yukatake, they would have been executed for insubordination long ago. Captain Neliel Tuadolschwank laced her fingers together and rested her chin atop them. Two previously assumed dead Espada are on the loose. No word from Nirvana regarding a truce. She sighed and closed her eyes. Is there any good news today? The fact remains we have successfully eradicated an ancient evil's nest, Captain So-iPhone spoke up. For this you are to be commended. Kian and Sentaro each considered how receiving a commendation from the Viper Company captain somehow felt like a death threat. As with anything connected to Anohana Retsu, you are not to discuss this incident with the public beyond general confirmation. Regarding the three human fighters, she looked to the Lord Commander, who nodded imperceptibly. They are to be considered a third party, acting separate from either our interests or the renegades. A triumvirate, Kisuk mused, gazing thoughtfully at the ceiling. Nirvana, Soul Society, and the unaffiliated. These unaffiliated already have superior firepower than us from Ulquiorra alone, So-iPhone pointed out. And how did they even know our operation was taking place? This is all suspect. We should make more of an effort to locate them and determine their intentions. Toshiro Hitsugaya leaned forward. Leopard Company volunteers to handle this reconnaissance assignment. Byakuya did not so much as shift an inch. That will not be necessary, Hitsugaya Teiku. When Toshiro looked about to object, he added, we cannot countenance such a risk, at least not before ascertaining a better idea of where we stand. It might be better to let them contact us, Isane Katetsu quickly interjected to defuse the brewing situation. Since they're acting in such a secretive fashion, they must value their anonymity. Trying to locate them could be considered a hostile action. We wouldn't want to alienate potential allies, right? Her attempt at conciliation did little to placate Captain Hitsugaya, who sulked in his chair like an adorable little snow imp. At this point Lord Commander Kukaki returned his attention to the two fidgeting Shinigami. You are dismissed. Return to your posts. Yes, sir. They saluted and bowed out together, not even daring to jostle one another for the right to be first out of the room. The pain was so very real upon awaking that when Aizen Sosuke touched his eye it came as a surprise to find no blood on his fingers. What happened? Was it just a dream? Kyoka Suijutsu. No response came from her. Unnerved, he went inside. The peaceful meadow welcomed him as always. There he found his lifelong partner slumped among the flowers with a hand pressed to her face. Blood flowed between her fingers. Kyoka Suijutsu. When he rushed forward she held up a hand to forestall him. Aizen halted, gazing at her with grief and dismay all over his face. She remained in this position for a while. Then slowly she reached over and pulled on one of the colorful wraps that concealed her body from view. In doing so a scarf slid down to cover the injury, and another eye was opened on a different side of her face. It is nothing, Sosuke. Merely a child's toy we left behind long ago that had already served its purpose. There is no cause for concern. I remain. He knelt beside her. Who hurt you? Please. Let it go. I do not wish for you to trouble yourself. This was a minor matter. You are certain? Yes. The boy is asleep now. Go to him. I am fine. Go, Sosuke. Please. Kyojaku was sitting in the garden listlessly plucking flowers when Usagi came trotting up and stood before him with paw on hip and mallet slung over his shoulder. Hello, little prince, the rabbit spoke politely. Hi, the boy sniffed, rubbing his eye without looking up. Whatever is the matter? That small pink nose wiggled in consternation. You look sad. I had a bad dream. Kyojaku wiped his dripping nose loudly on his sleeve. Then he felt Yu's small paw pat him on the head. There, little one. Nothing to be afraid of. You mustn't cry. I know you to be a brave young man. The white rabbit sat beside him. Would you like to hear a story? Kyojaku hung his head and mumbled, No. Oh, that's too bad. Because I had a good one for you. When only more sniffles followed, the tiny moon god sighed. Come now, young prince. Nobles such as ourselves mustn't cry. He dropped to all fours and began hopping around Kyojaku in circles. You want to grow up brave and fierce like your father, do you not? Mama cries, he pointed out with childish confidence. Does she? When? He continued on as though not having heard. And the old lady cried. Old lady? Ah, you must have a story for me, then. The moon rabbit plopped down in front of him and rested his long-eared head against the mallet. What old lady? The little old lady who lived all alone in the woods. She cried when the bad man scared her. Kyojaku occupied himself with plucking the petals off a flower. But then she sang a song, and he ran away. He had gotten nearly all the petals off before noticing that you hadn't spoken for a while. When Kyojaku looked at the rabbit, it was to find those glistening red eyes locked on him intently. Where? Usagi said in a different tone of voice, did you hear that story? In a dream. He scooted his knees to his chin and laid a soft cheek against them to regard the rabbit from this angle. He went into her house like Goldilocks and the three bears, and when she got home, he was going to hurt her with a sword. The boy began to shake, as though recalling something frightening, and those great round eyes filled with tears. I don't want to talk now. Just one more thing, Kyojaku, please, and then we can play whatever you like. Usagi leaned forward, clutching the wooden handle of his mochi-making implement. Do you remember the song the old woman sang? He nodded. Would you sing it for me? He did. As much as he could remember, the gentle child crooned the words of a song he had heard only in dreams. As he did, the rabbit's head bent low. Usagi shuffled around in a circle until he was facing away from Kyojaku. The boy broke off when he saw those small shoulders start to shake. Usagi. He crept forward and stretched out a hand. Are you crying? On the glowing moon-white fur, that single black spot quivered. Never. Kyojaku sucked in his breath upon hearing this voice. It was almost like the orange-eyed monster that attacked him and his sister. Or even the evil howls that had haunted him since the day he was born. But nothing could have frightened him more than the transformation that took place when you whipped around. The rabbit's eyes had gone black as the night sky. Yellow circles flared in those empty depths, and he lunged forward, grabbing Kyojaku by the shirt and dragging him close to snarl directly in his face. You will never sing that again. Never speak of it to anyone. Do you hear me? Never. Confronted by this sudden violence from a person he had always trusted, Kyojaku sent up a high, shivering wail, twisting from side to side in fright as he sought to escape in vain. Stop crying. You are a noble. We do not weep like babes in arms. A king does not. He gave a start and let go suddenly. Kyojaku fell back, the jarring shock of hitting the ground interrupting his tears for a moment. Flat on his back, sucking in a deep breath, he started to howl once more. The trembling rabbit stood on hind legs before the grieving child. His pink nostrils flared as he panted in heavy breaths, paws curled like fists. A king, he rasped in a voice hoarse with suppressed emotion, should know better. With that, Yosaji-Yu transformed into a painting on a scroll that depicted him crouched atop the moon. He then rose into the sky where he became a constellation of stars that twinkled down stardust. These shimmering drops settled on the field below like snow, shining brighter than a lamp in the heavens. And after a while, Kyojaku sat up. He looked around at the beautiful starlit field he found himself in, forgetting all about the horrible things that happened to him today. With that he set about gathering the stardust into a wicker basket and went racing over the hills, scattering fistfuls of it everywhere and laughing in delight. And all the while, the moon shone overhead, observing his play. Sentaro was an irreplaceable part of our division. Yasukika Imura patted his sobbing captain's shoulder in commiseration as he led her away from the military funeral where the ashes of their former comrade were being scooped up by diligent monks. To think that he should die in such horrific and humiliating fashion. Isane sobbed, her massive bosom quaking with every breath. How will we ever bear the shame? Not to worry, Taiko, Yasukika assured her smoothly. I have already taken appropriate measures. Heron Company will not suffer unduly the disgraceful loss of its co-second seat. And speaking of which, perhaps we should waste no time in confirming my new official rank of lieutenant? For the good of company morale. You understand, yes. Of course, Yasukika-san. The tall beauty blushed and threw a blissfully grateful smile at him. You've certainly earned it. I'm so blessed to have an officer of your caliber under my command. I don't know what we would do were it not for your immaculate example both on and off the field of battle. At that point a stray dog bounded in from nowhere and snatched up the sack containing the unfortunate Sentaro's earthly remains. It ran off with the monks chasing after it shouting in alarm. Upon witnessing this degrading display Captain Katetsu burst into a fresh bout of sobs. Yasukika comforted his femininely vulnerable senior officer. As he did, her voluptuous body brushed against his arm, and he couldn't help but smile. Yes, it was his responsibility as the new lieutenant of Heron Squad to see to his captain's every need. In whatever manner she should require. On all fours, tears streaming down her face and giant breasts bouncing as he rammed into her panting screaming body. Yasukika chuckled under his breath as he led his future conquest back to her chambers. Thinking naughty thoughts again, co-second seat. In a flash Imura spun about holding his pen like a weapon. Ajido neatly evaded this slash and stepped back to the doorway of the office. The handsome officer of Heron had two attractive Shinigami ladies hanging off him, and he offered a pleasant smile at the fuming Yasukika. Ajido. His superior snarled the name like a curse. Don't disturb me while I'm filling out reports. I've had twice as much to do since Katsubaki went missing. About that, sir, Ajido trilled like a particularly odious form of nightingale. We just received word that Sentaro and his team have finally returned from their assignment. Which they completed admirably, from what I hear. Imura's spectacles slipped askew on his nose. With a hasty cough he sought to readjust them. That is, wonderful news. I thank you for informing me of it. You're very welcome. The Shinigami heartthrob turned to depart. Now you'll have more time to work on self-improvement, co-second seat Imura. He strolled off, and Yasakika heard the two girls giggle at some comment he made further down the hall. For his part, the trembling officer turned back to the duties of his command. He feverishly attacked the pile of forms, stabbing his ink pen into them with savage force as though they were a hated enemy's flesh, each line and loop of ink the blood of a certain overconfident pretty boy who would one day assuredly get his due. Well, at least there was something to be grateful for. His favorite mortal cell phone novel/manga was finally being converted into an anime. What are you? Rania whispered breathlessly. Shaking with dread and exhilaration, she gazed up at the tall moonlit figure looming over her. Moonlight glinted off his glasses as he cast a stern look upon the tiny girl in a red scarf cowering at his feet. Behind him the body of Graf Radu Tatha Oltz burned away to ash. Yasakika, he informed her with a smile that made the gypsy girl's heart race for some reason. Lieutenant Imura Yasakika. I'm a Shinigami. Yasakika smiled as he resumed his work. Yes. Still so much to look forward to. As long as you had your health, everything would work out. And Heron was all about health. I've got a few minutes. It should be safe to talk now. Glad to find you're still a reliable guy. Thanks for the latest, dear diary, by the way. We need all the laughs we can get round here. I hope you're putting this information to better use than cheap giggles. I'm not risking my neck just for your amusement. Don't ya worry about that, big fella. If it weren't for you, we'd never have known about that little operation until it was too late. I'm just surprised you still have access to the old Kido core logs is all. Even with Tessai back in charge, they've never been particularly focused on logistics to any great extent. Changing your password uses up valuable research time, especially if you forget it the next day. No surprise I'm still in the system with the captain's privileges. Kinda makes me glad I never joined that happy bunch. You wouldn't have been welcome. What? They ain't got a sense of humor around there. Nothing you would consider funny. Wait, I hear something. The door to his office opened. Dad. Quickly Ishine Kurosaka slid some half-completed forms over the paper and paused with pen held at the ready. I'll be out in a minute, Karen-chan. Tell the next patient we'll be right with them. Actually, there's something you should see. Curious, the doctor stood and followed his daughter into the hallway. Miming for silence, she crept along the corridor towards the waiting room. Ishine followed warily. Upon reaching the entrance they both peeked around the corner, and he felt his spine clench. The patient sat in the waiting room flipping through a magazine, clearly oblivious to the two masked Arashi mages floating to either side of her muttering in unison. That which is lost, Vega catches. That which is left, Altair ensnares. As Ishine watched, the spell took effect. Their patient's body began to glow, and with the completion of the casting, this aura vanished. In no way did the woman react to this. However, he couldn't help but think there was a subtle glow of health about her now. As though whatever ailment brought her to them had simply disappeared like magic. The two Arashi departed without another word. Karen and her father stole away until they found a quiet place to talk. So? He asked. Seriously? His daughter huffed. Dad, they can't just barge in here whenever they want. This clinic is our home too. Now, Karen-chan, you know better, he admonished her gently. We accept any help when it comes to treating our patients. You're old enough to realize that includes certain unauthorized treatments. This isn't like black market supplies or pulling a fast one on the insurance companies, she groused, placing hands on hips of her nurse's outfit and frowning up at him. For one thing, we're not even sure what they're doing to people. And for another, if they heal our customers beforehand, how are we supposed to get paid? They're treating the sick, with no adverse reaction we can determine, he said in an uncharacteristically serious tone he knew always frustrated her. His oldest daughter still had difficulty dealing with him as more than just a hyperactive goofball who launched surprise attacks on his own children. And in terms of the bottom line, we're still in the black. So don't worry about things, kiddo. Concentrate on finishing your schoolwork and maybe finding some nice boy to give me more grandchildren, eh? She punched him, of course. But Ishine felt it was worth the blow to his diaphragm and subsequent lack of air to teach his child a valuable lesson. When it came to their patients, he would suffer no countermanding, not from her or even Naneo when you came right down to it. All that mattered was these people get the best possible care. And should that arrive in the form of a dodgy cure-all concocted by the most dangerous woman in existence, well, who was he to turn up his nose at unorthodox methods? Not like you could always depend on following the rules to get you anywhere in life. That was another good lesson for Karen to learn early on. I only hope neither of us has cause to regret my decision in the future. The portal deposited Grimjoe in an unfamiliar location. He inspected his new surroundings with interest before casually destroying the gate to ensure no one would follow. So there were other paths available. Wish I'd been able to reroute it from the inside. He frowned down at his gaping hollow hole. However much time has passed, it really did a number on me. The room he was in proved to be a huge white hemisphere that seemed to go on forever. He could see the ceiling dimly, but the walls were so far away he couldn't be sure how big the place really was. Its white architecture reminded him uncomfortably of Las Noches. And to top it all off, nothing existed here but a field of flowers. Small white blossoms the size of roses grew all over the black earthen floor. There were hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Hang on. I see something over there. Is that a tower? A sword point drove towards his throat, and the panther spirit leapt away, landing further off to survey his attacker. Well, son of a bitch, Grimjoe drawled. Look who finally joined the winning team. Wearing a long black coat, the hollow that now called itself Rajuro Odoribashi threw back his hood and scowled at his old nemesis. How the hell did you get in here? I took a detour. Rajuro cast a look at the remains of the gate, then back at his opponent. The witch gave you permission, I take it. You got another explanation? Grimjoe shot back. He took his eyes off the other hollow, adopting a deceptively relaxed attitude while once again surveying the high-ceilinged dome in which they stood. So what's this place? Your private poppy patch. By all rights I should kill you. But I don't want to make a mess. Rajuro sheathed his sword and beckoned for him to follow. Come with me. And watch where you step. These things are delicate. Something you have in common, the Espada sneered, but complied. They walked down the lines of flower beads, most of which appeared empty. As they passed, however, Grimjoe did not fail to notice when a new plant simply sprouted up where none had been before, unveiling a pale flower at once. There was a scent in the air he found intoxicating. It was almost like human souls. For better or worse, it looks like we're stuck with one another, the renegade Vazard threw over his shoulder. I don't expect you'll be here long. But while you are, I'll have to insist you not make a fuss. What we're doing here is important to certain people. They came at last to what appeared to be the center of the dome. Grimjoe peered up at the only other thing here besides flowers. It reminded him of a maple, tall wooden shaft in the center with numerous ribbons tied around it that were anchored to the ground. But these ribbons had wooden tablets inscribed with charms hanging off them. Almost like seals. Also the red pole itself had obviously been broken into pieces and was now bound together by copper wire. Way up at its highest point he could see the curved blade of a giant spear of some kind with a rope tassel dangling off it. This too had been shattered and wrapped in wire to hold its shape. The hell is this shit? Grimjoe spat. You celebrating May Day early or something? Rajuro turned on him with a sneer. Why, isn't it obvious, my dear Grimjoe? He swept out both arms in a dramatic gesture. We're growing a garden. The Quinta Espada just spat in distaste and went stalking off. Rajuro watched attentively to make sure he did no damage to the fields. He inhaled deeply, savoring the smell of human flesh. Each blossom and branch in this room derived from a living soul in the human world. All courtesy of the oh-so-dutiful Arashi clan and their trust in the word of Rukia Kukaki. He looked up at the stitched-together fragments of the Sokioku halberd and smiled. When growing a garden, a bit of patience was all it took. Arc 6, Fin. Chapter 26, Winter's Touch, The Lies That Bind. Hirako wondered where she was. The little girl looked around. She lay in the corner of a large room, bigger than her whole house. It was bright and empty, with a low ceiling and tatami mats on the floor. The walls were sliding screens like at home. But they had pictures on them, mountains and trees, birds, and people. This was not her home. A person knelt in the center of the floor, painting on a huge sheet of paper. The little girl rose and padded over on bare feet. The room's other occupant did not notice her approach. Long black hair ran down the painter's back, very smooth and straight, so Hirako automatically wanted to touch it. But then she spotted something strange. On the floor next to them was a white mask like the kind she wore at festivals. It was shaped like a beautiful woman's face, eyes closed as though asleep. Curiously, Hirako picked up the mask, examining it from front to back. She shook it to see if the lady would wake up, but she did not. Meanwhile, the painter still had taken no notice of her. Instead she, for Hirako thought it was a woman now, began to grind more ink on a black stone in the tray before her, focusing on this task to the exclusion of all else. The girl moved closer to see what she was so busy drawing, but it proved to be words she couldn't read. After a while, Hirako grew bored of watching. She peered around for something to do, and spied several more brushes in a stand by the lady's knee. Happily, the little girl selected one, and began to write her name on the paper just as she had been taught. Beside her, the artist continued to grind more ink, solemn and quiet. The two of them worked side by side for a time. Then her brush ran dry, and Hirako leaned over to rub the bristles across the wet ink stone. So intent was she on this, she did not notice the woman beside her grow still. Hirako got back to work, humming a song as she returned to her craft. She tried to hold her arm still just as Aji-san instructed. He had painted a picture that hung on the wall of her room since she was a baby. It was Hirako's name, written very neatly. She often practiced copying it. Kaa-san said her Nii-san was a great artist, and one day she would be too. Her mother liked to draw little characters when she told her bedtime stories, and they were always funny. Slowly, the black-haired woman's head turned to stare at the child. "Who are you?" Blinking, Hirako looked up, and screamed. "How did you get in here? Who are you?" The girl just screamed and screamed without thought, scrambling backwards to get away. Her hand bumped against something, and Hirako looked down to see the mask from before. But now the face was awake. It looked at her, yellow eyes wide and frightened. The mouth moved. "Run away, child," it whispered urgently. "Flee from here. Go now. Who are you?" The madwoman came racing towards her on hands and knees, screaming and snarling, flinging her awful head back and forth. Terror took hold. Snatching up the mask, Hirako sprang up and ran. She didn't know where to go, the walls all looked the same, she couldn't tell which was the door. In desperation, the stricken child grabbed a frame and pulled. It refused to budge. She tore at the paper screen with her fingers, but it held firm. A hand caught hold of her wrist to wrench her around. Horrified, the girl gaped up at the demonic thing looming overhead. "Girl!" Her head snapped down. Still clutched in her fist, the talking mask stared back at her and spoke again. "Put the mask on her face. Quickly, child." An awful howl shook the room. When Hirako looked up, the creature was bending down to devour her, and with a wail she swung up her hand, thrusting the mask forward as she did. Her fingers struck the wall so hard it hurt. Hirako clutched them to her chest, gasping with pain, tears running hot down her cheeks. For a moment she couldn't breathe, and wildly the girl looked around to try and locate the source of this evil. But all she saw was her room, dark and quiet, with soft moonlight peeking under the curtains. 2. The frightened child choked, sucked in a breath and screamed, "To-san." The sound of cursing, followed by bumping and racing feet, then her father yanked open the door and came charging in. She stretched out her hands for him hopefully as he stumbled to the bed to draw his daughter into the circle of his strong arms. She wept in gratitude now, pressing her face into his shirt, finally certain that she was safe. "Shhh. Her father whispered, stroking her head while she shivered. "It's okay, don't be scared, you're safe. Don't worry, princess. I've got you." "Hirako." She peeked over his broad shoulder, and there was Kaa-san in a yutaka hurrying to join them. Her older brother Jaku hung by the door frame, watching anxiously. Their parents knelt together, seeking to reassure their traumatized daughter and one another. "Was it a nightmare?" "I think so, she hasn't said anything yet." "Jaku, it's okay, go back to bed. Your sister just had a bad dream, is all. Ichigo, her arm. Look at the mark on her wrist, it looks like a hoe. Koko. The older boy used the nickname to address her, shuffling closer. Was it the monster? The one with orange eyes? Kyojaku, do what your father says and go back to. No. Hirako whispered, and they all grew quiet. She looked at them, trying to find a way to describe what she had seen. The lady. Lady. Her father frowned, glancing at her mother questioningly. Hirako shuddered at the awful memory, and began to cry anew. The lady. The lady with a hole for a face. Then she broke down sobbing, and nothing her parents said or did could make her stop. Servants lay scattered along the hallway. Dead or worse, Aizen couldn't be bothered to find out. Those living pressed themselves against the wall as their master raced past, not daring to look at his terrible visage. He flung twisted bodies out of the way and wrenched open the door. Retsu. The Lord of Heaven cried out. Blood spattered the walls like paint. Broken remains of vassals littered the floor. Their uncaring mistress swept back and forth across the drawing room in an agitated state, head nearly brushing the ceiling, the hem of her fine robes trailing through ink and gore to leave a gruesome smear on mats and parchment paper with every step. Where are you? Anohana panted. Where are you? I know you are here, there is nowhere to hide. Show yourself. Where are you? Retsu. He approached warily now. The mask was on, but clearly something had put her out of sorts. Drawing nearer, the master of this domain laid a hand on her sleeve. He spoke in a calm, clear voice. Retsu, please. I am here. Tell me what is wrong. She drew to a halt and looked down at him. For a moment there was no sign she even knew who he was. Then her burning yellow eyes softened in recognition. Sosuke, my dear child. Anohana reached a hand up to place over his own, patting it softly. Her skin felt cold, and he grew even more concerned. Retsu, Aizen guided her down to sit. Tell me what happened. Who has caused you such distress? Shall I send for Halibel? Her head shook violently as she settled her large frame. It was no one I have ever seen before. A child, Sosuke. Right here, in this room. A thought occurred to him. Was it the boy Kyojaku? Were you dreaming? No. Slowly she turned to peer at him, and Sosuke Aizen felt dread surge through his bones at the expression on his mother's bone-white face. I did not dream this, Sosuke. She was with me. I touched her. She brushed a hand over one smooth white cheek. I felt it. Oh. Those proud features suddenly fell, and a single red tear ran down her mask. Sosuke. I heard her. I heard another child. A broken, empty moan echoed from that open mouth. Uttering this eerie lament, the sorceress bent low to place her head in his lap, sobbing with deepest regret. Her dutiful son stroked her hair, aggrieved at seeing her in this state again. Silently he gazed about the room, reflecting on how to proceed, what commands to give, what warnings to issue, which of the surviving servants who had seen her like this would have to die. Tsun could handle that. He deserved the pain. In doing so, his keen eye spied something then that seemed out of place. On the floor, the paper Anohana had been working on remained, wrinkled, and smeared black and red. Most of what she had drawn was obliterated by the mess. But down by the edge, another hand had scrawled something. Small, clumsy, like a child trying to imitate their elders. Aizen saw the name written there, and spoke it aloud. Hirako. You there? What are you doing? Rukia looked up. A Shinigami was approaching, fresh out of the academy by the look of him. He clearly hadn't gotten used to wearing the assigned black battle uniform as he jogged up to her, adjusting his soul cutter as it banged against his hip. The hem of his jacket front was pale green, indicating he belonged to Leopard Company. He drew to a halt and glowered, hand on the hilt of his sword. I said. Good evening, she told him. I am just here to reflect. And with that she went back to smoothing the small blanket out on the ground. The young fellow didn't seem quite sure how to respond to this. He looked around the wide empty plaza of the Siriti in which they were the only two people visible. It was night, and the stars twinkled overhead. A thought occurred to him. Ma'am, are you lost? I know how easy it is to get turned around here. I'm new, so, that is, His voice trailed off when she just looked up and smiled. No, I am not lost. But thank you for checking in. Please don't let me keep you from your patrol. With that, the tiny mystery woman produced some sake dishes and set them out as though expecting company. After this she settled in and seemed perfectly ready to wait all night. The guard watched her for a time, made to draw away, and hesitated. He remembered one of the veteran Shinigami mentioning that this particular area used to be restricted. Some underground compound, or a library. He hadn't been paying attention, caught up in trying to memorize the frankly bewildering layout of his assigned territory. It was like a maze designed to confuse and entrap any invading army, with dead-end turns and asymmetrical layouts galore. He could sense the strength of the small soul in front of him, even though she didn't appear to carry a Zanpakuto. Not to mention her kimono was amazing, decorated with cherry blossom branches on which perched birds so artfully crafted they appeared ready to break into song. A wealth of jeweled pins held her short hair in an exquisite arrangement. The whole effect served to leave him feeling shabby by comparison, and her general air of sang-froid only added to that. And this setup, it looked like a picnic. Just what was going on? Eventually he reached a decision, and bowed to her. I'll be nearby if you need anything, ma'am. You may, carry on. Thank you, the pretty lady smiled at him. And don't forget to check in with your squad every 12 minutes. Rounds go by faster if you follow the rules. He seemed confused, and merely sketched a hasty bow to her before trotting off. Rukia watched him go. The sense of his soul signature diminished with distance. She had a better idea of this territory than he did. It would take him a good half hour to find his way back to this spot, and that was assuming he didn't get lost along the way. More than enough time to finish her reason for being here. Assuming her cohort made it on time. With that she settled in to wait. Not a minute later, a noise came to her ears. It was like rice crackers crumbling. Rukia glanced over to a patch of wall which seemed to be coming loose. A short figure emerged out of it as though passing through the masonry. He inspected the surroundings, dusted himself off, and came ambling over. Good evening, Kukakiya-sama. The man flashed a gleaming grin. Mayuri-sama, she returned formally, making room for him on the picnic blanket. Mayuri Kuratsuke, chief researcher of the Shinigami Research and Development Bureau, then proceeded to take his seat beside her. Anyone familiar with the amoral genius might have a hard time recognizing him right now. He had abandoned his usual dramatic ensemble in favor of a simple brown coat over a personalized royal purple battle uniform. Even more remarkable, his skin was a normal hue, and he lacked any trace of makeup. Ashizaji Jizo still swung between his legs, but he quickly unhooked the sheath and laid it beside him. Forgive the interruption, she told him. I no longer have access to the local patrol schedule, and my information was out of date. It seems they rotated it since last year. I hope you weren't waiting long. No matter, Mayuri gave a desultory flick of his long-nailed hand. I would have taken care of him if he insisted on intruding any further. Our anniversary is something I look forward to all year. And I have a tight schedule. Of course. So saying, Rukia retrieved the sake cups. They were of the finest porcelain, so thin as to be almost translucent, and lacking any decoration whatsoever. She held one out to him, which the incognito academic accepted. For his part, from beneath his coat he brought out a smoky green glass bottle shaped like a coiled dragon. Cracking the seal, he popped the cork and measured out 2 libations, one for him and one for her. Beneath the summer moon, philosopher and princess raised a toast to each other. It is good to be alive. He reflected merrily, and threw back his drink. Yes, Rukia intoned as she took a more modest sip. It is. Even more so knowing others are not, Mayuri added. His golden eyes scrunched up on the happiest grin imaginable, and he chuckled as he refilled his cup. The young mother remarked noncommittally. 7 years ago, on this very night by their estimations, the Central 46 of Seoul Society were slaughtered to a man beneath their feet. The same prestigious body of ex-captains and scholars who pronounced unjust sentence on both of them. Well, unjust in her case, but Mayuri certainly considered his imprisonment unwarranted. And for the last 4 years, ever since his return to sanity, they had made a point to meet here and toast their continued survival. A petty, malicious memorial, perhaps. But we are none of us saints, after all. Rukia took another sip. It was a fine brew, really. He had selected well this year. Most people would consider any drink offered by Mayuri Kuratsuki as a prelude to drugged sleep, followed by waking up strapped to a table while being earnestly dissected. But as the patroness to his studies, and a fundamental reason the majority of his staff preferred to work under his auspices, she enjoyed a rather unusual level of trust with the homicidal doctor. As long as the funding kept flowing in, she was reasonably certain he wouldn't choose to terminate their working relationship, one way or another. "Have you had any more children?" he asked suddenly. She had to suppress a shiver at discussing this with him. Mayuri Kuratsuka did not inspire comfort at the best of times. And this topic in particular was sensitive. "No, Excellency. Your last one was a girl, yes. My daughter. Her name is Hirako." "Ah. Yes. Interesting choice." He traced his little finger around the rim of his cup, then sucked the tip experimentally. "I don't suppose. You are not free to meet her," she spoke coldly, leaving not even an ounce of threat out of her voice. It felt wrong hearing him expressing even a bleak interest in her children. A mother's instinct told her to drop this conversation before it got out of hand. Mayuri just shrugged. "Hardly a promising research avenue, anyway. I understand the child has not even a trace of spiritual power, is that right?" One of the pins in her hair burned with icy wrath, as the disguised Sode no Shirayuki expressed her own displeasure at Mayuri's complete disregard of simple human compassion. Her guardian spirit had insisted this tradition of theirs should end, if only because the dead were better off forgotten in this case. But Rukia persevered. She knew how easy it was to get on Mayuri's bad side. And their working relationship was always a high-wire act, at least for her. There was never any certainty about what he might say or propose next. Better to stay in this particular devil's good graces. "I have enough bitter enemies in my life. Hirako cannot see spirits, as far as we can tell. Well, that just means you'll have to take extra special care of her." Rukia threw a searching glance at her drinking partner, but Mayuri didn't follow up on this surprising comment. In fact, he was the one who seemed uncomfortable now, scratching at his cheek and grimacing as though that last statement had given him pain. With a sour curl of his lip he took another drink. "I'm told the last of the halos will be emptied within a year." Yes. Thanks to her continued interaction with Lord Arashi, she had stayed abreast of current events despite no longer being an official Shinigami. "The final plane has entered construction. I believe it is simply called Paradise. Paradise." He tilted his head introspectively, gazing at the stars. "So they called this place once. And then they lost sight of what counted, leaving us with Paradise, lost." He chuckled to himself. "And to think they called me mad." Before she could respond, Mayuri threw her a sharp look. "Has she contacted you again?" No need to ask who he meant. "We have not heard from Anohana in 3 years." He grunted and turned his attention to the stars again. Rukia felt a need for something to warm her, and so downed the liquor in one great gulp. She had spoken with few people about her interactions with Retsu Anohana since the birth of Kyojaku. The imprisoned captain of Soul Society had made contact with her family on several occasions. "They're attacking us in dreams, you know." Rukia stilled in pouring herself another cup. "Pardon?" "Their loss of resources in terms of active personnel has been substantial. Those traitor Vazard, the Wild Hunt, Grimjo Jaggerjacks, various Shinigami loyal to their cause, gone." He snapped his fingers brusquely. "And while Anohana can project herself to the mortal world through Jigai, those are finite options. But more esoteric methods remain available to them. And she will use every available opportunity to strike at you." When Rukia continued to stare at him blankly, his nostrils flared, and he wagged a blue-nailed claw in her face. "Hear this, Ajou-sama. I choose to abide by the sacrifice you consented to make, out of courtesy. But if your benighted brother and clumsy consort have not made this clear to you by now, let me say this much, Anohana Retsu cannot be trusted. Whatever happened to her after the sealing of Nirvana, the state she currently inhabits poses a threat to you, your children, and everyone you hold dear. He turned away from her, chewing his lip, eyes hooded, and filled with dark wrath. There is no more dangerous enemy than one you once counted as a friend. Stubborn valor compelled her to come to Anohana's defense. I admit, her actions since then have left me bewildered. But I think it unwise to write off such a powerful and proven champion of soul society based on personal spite. Really? He offered her a speculative glance. Did her crippling your lover not leave you with even the smallest bit of animosity, then? A wave of cold washed over him as the small Shinigami's eyes glowed faintly. No more than is warranted, she replied. Mayuri tapped his incisors, eyes round with curiosity as he stared at her. Then he chuckled. Well, the fact you still attend this little anniversary of ours should have reassured me you haven't lost that old fire which made you so attractive to certain parties. Before she could even wonder what he might mean by that, Mayuri reached out to refill her cup. But let me share a hypothesis before we drop this line of conversation, Ajou-sama. As someone familiar with the precise application of both pain and revenge in terms of my pursuits, it is painfully obvious to me what is happening in regards to you and the residents of Nirvana. His golden eyes fastened on her with chilling intensity. Aizen and his cadre, they are spawning monsters to challenge Soul Society. But in addition to that, they are hurting you. Any way they can. Instinctively Rukia wanted to object that she was not important enough to warrant such attention, but experience told her to hold back. Instead she asked only, assuming that is the case, to what end? Satisfied at her agreement, Mayuri continued his analysis. Simple, they want you to hate them. Hate them to the point that it consumes your rationality. Hate them so much, it blinds you to any risk, concern, or duty, until the only thing that matters is burying your sword in their hearts and watching the life drain from their eyes. To achieve that, you will do anything. Even break the seal on Nirvana yourself if you have to. Hatred, after all, is a powerful motivator. He was positively vibrating with excitement when he spoke, and the overripe fruit scent of his ryotsu proved so strong she had difficulty breathing. Mayuri made note of her discomfort. Oddly, he took steps to ameliorate it, drawing his powerful soul presence back under control before continuing. Have care with your loved ones, Ajou-sama. To lose a family member hurts the most. This vacillating between creepy psycho and concerned father figure was even more unsettling than usual. It was not the first time Mayuri had spoken in a way that left her wondering whether his imprisonment after the Autumn War had left him deranged to the extent that he came out the other side somewhat sane. Crazier things have happened. She almost asked him about this. Instead Rukia remembered her manners, and chose instead to change the subject. Have you decided on which heavenly plane you would like to inhabit, Excellency? Indeed. He sounded smugly confident, as though congratulating himself on having made the best possible pick. I chose to make my official home in Pandemonium, where neighbors are few and the design lends itself to more creative displays than the syrupy sweet confines of those other soft realms. Pandemonium was indeed one of the more sparsely populated planes fashioned over the last 7 years. Most souls only went there as a form of extreme sport or recreation, not to settle down. But several other members of the R&D Bureau had chosen it as their primary residence. The Rokanga could conceivably be totally deserted in just a few more years. As for the Court of Pure Souls, it remained the principal dwelling of the 4 great houses, their subordinate clans, and the Gotei 7. But all the Shinigami had been given the option to have other living spaces allotted to them in the new domains, and most had taken them up on this offer. It was a place to return to after the day was done, to enjoy the comforts of the afterlife that had been denied them for ages past when their lives were about little more than service. Perhaps even to raise a family. Has the world improved from the changes we made, do you think? She asked suddenly. Mayuri settled back on his hand and gazed at the star-speckled heavens. I care little for such plebeian notions, he commented casually. Then, in a different tone of voice, but numbers do not lie, Ajou-sama. The incidents of hollow attacks in the mortal realm are at an all-time low, and even more telling, the formation of new hollows appears to have dropped in the last few years. Yet Shinigami remain in short supply. Last term's graduation was the smallest in living memory. There is still much research to be done. Still, I would hesitate to posit that, in terms of fulfillment, our efforts have contributed to an overall better standard of living in both worlds. He then held out his cup. To us, my dear. They clinked their drinks together, mindful not to damage the porcelain, before going back to appreciating this fine evening and all the benefits of continued existence. When the Shinigami on patrol came back nearly an hour later, he found no trace that anyone had been there at all. We've seen a marked decrease in hollow attacks these last few years, Ryako Ryahim said as she set a cup of tea on the captain's desk. Hitsugaya picked it up and gazed into its depths for a moment. Tiger has practically set up shop in Hueco Mundo since the war. He sipped leisurely and settled back in his seat with a groan. With Siamese to aid them, that's roughly a quarter of our combined strength focused on nothing but exterminating hollows. Seen from that perspective, it comes as no surprise. His fifth seat picked up the tray, pausing on her way out. I'd feel more comfortable if our own ranks saw a proportionate jump. The last few graduating classes have been getting smaller and smaller. It makes me wonder if there might not be a correlation. He quirked a snowy eyebrow at her. What, something like the fewer hollows, the fewer people born with Shinigami powers. Just a thought, Captain. She shrugged and gave a smile on her way out. Hitsugaya spent a few minutes going over logistics and patrol reports, but his heart wasn't really in it. Not for the first time, he found himself considering his new role in the afterlife and that of his unit. The Halos were no longer a priority. Since the formation of the Godi I-7, the heavenly relocation oases had been specifically assigned to Leopard Company's protection. Officers from other squads oversaw bureaucratic details, but his people were the official Shinigami who handled security for those temporary shelters. At first, it had seemed like a good match. But after a while, when it became apparent the Hollows couldn't muster anything close to a concerted effort after the war, he had started to chafe at the leash. Leopard Squad could do more than run patrols in the Siridi and stake out the Halos. But time and again, Lord Commander Kukaki rejected his proposals for missions in Hueco Mundo or joint assaults with the more bombastic divisions. That fight against the Wild Hunt was the last real action they saw, and this only because it had come out of nowhere while they were engaged with Siamese and Viper in a sting operation that supposedly held minimal threat. It had taken intense pressure to get Greyhound to even let him do that much. The unexpected jaunt into the living world to battle immortal brutes was a gift horse not to be overlooked. And then there was the personal training. For nearly 8 years now, Toshiro had enjoyed the close tutorship of the head of Greyhound Company himself, Lord Commander Byakuya Kukaki, 28th head of that house and the strongest in history. But again, his initial opinion of that arrangement being favorable was drastically lessened over time. It was not, as he had expected, an opportunity to cross swords with the strongest head of that major household in all its history. Instead, Hitsugaya found himself made to endure endless treatises on the nature of the soul, meditating to better commune with his Zanpakuto, and full-blown scholarly lectures overseen by old graybeards who hadn't picked up a sword in ages. To put it mildly, Toshiro was losing his mind. And then, of course, there was another more personal matter left unresolved. Feeling restless, he decided to ask for an update on that personally. He rose and exited his office. Immediately his second seat Hisagi Shihei sprang up and saluted. Heading out, Teiku. I'm going to visit Greyhound, the small officer informed him. Keep a lid on things until I get back. Yes, sir. The tattooed warrior opened some files and got to work. Hitsugaya made good time and soon found himself in Greyhound Company's headquarters. Passing Shinigami bowed and he acknowledged them as he made his way to the inner offices. There he found the second seat and diligent public servant Izuru Kira speaking to some low-ranked personnel. Upon catching sight of the small head of Leopard Company, the gloomy-looking blonde dismissed his subordinates and came over to greet him. Captain Hitsugaya. How can I be of help? He bowed, then came up. I'm afraid Kukakisu Teiku isn't here right now. Actually, it's you I wanted to speak with. Oh. Kira's only visible eyebrow rose, and he tucked one hand in his jacket almost furtively. He never liked being called out on things, always assuming the worst, like he was expecting to be upbraided at any given moment. This had been the case even before, when he worked under Jinichi Maru. Or maybe because of that. No great surprise, really. The third used to be a specialized support division. A sort of jack of all trades, able to help any of their fellow squads whether in terms of combat, spellcraft, or recon. Everyone used to think of the second division as the ones who handled any nasty business that wasn't publicly acknowledged, like assassinations or disappearances. But in truth, over the centuries, it had been the third who dealt with truly unsavory acts, usually under the pretense of assisting other divisions. That's what made their members so tight-lipped and suspicious most of the time. The third were habitually uncommunicative when it came to their work. Still, Kira was the one he needed to speak with. I wanted to know if there have been any sightings of Momo. The dour lieutenant grew still. His hooded eye flickered slightly as though questing for eavesdroppers, and he hesitated before speaking. No, sir. Lieutenant Hinamari's status since the war remains missing. Toshiro continued to watch the other man carefully. For the past 7 years he had afforded the 2 traitor lieutenants their due, such as it were. The captains all agreed to this prior to casting the memory charm on them. Hisagi Shihei and Izuru Kira were permitted to have the futures once denied them by Aizen's machinations. That meant they had no memory of what they or Momo did. As far as they knew, their valued comrade had been lost in the battle and never heard from again. But it was hard. Just like dealing with Rukia and Renji sometimes, who while proven loyal, remained unaware to what lengths their own fears had driven them. On the topic of Momo, however, Toshiro was willing to push the boundaries. She, after all, never had any spell cast on her. And from what she admitted, her crimes were far more heinous. Nanao continued to insist her defeat of Hinamori had robbed the madwoman of her spiritual strength completely, rendering her a normal plus. Yet even then, a lost soul still posed a threat. And after 5 years of searching, since the petrification spell on her was broken, not a trace had been found. Momo's free. And I have to take responsibility for her. I just wanted to make sure, he said in what he hoped was a friendly manner. We're all hoping to find her well. Excuse me. And he made to depart. Sir. Kira added, a habitual wariness in his words. He swallowed when those piercing green eyes turned to regard him again. Yet still the downcast minor noble mustered his resolve. I never said this before, but I'm very grateful you never stopped searching for Hinamori. Since that day, when we all 4 survived the attack on the academy graduates, we've tried to remain close, no matter our change in rank. 1 captain, Toshiro thought, 2 lieutenants, and 1 fugitive. Those are quite the disparate lifestyles. But even then, Izuru continued, after the war, when we couldn't find her, none of us were certain what to think. We lost so many that day, and with Aizen's Kyoka Suijutsu further complicating the matter, making some of us look like traitors. I always thought the reason Hinamori disappeared was because she followed him into Nirvana. I wish I could say for sure why, maybe to confront him or, well, that's moot at this point. He then looked the captain square in the eye, his jaw resolutely clenched. I never had the courage to ask we conduct an official investigation, even after our position had improved and we weren't always running ourselves ragged trying to restore Soul Society. So 5 years ago, when you did, I was grateful. As Hinamari's friend, I want to thank you for not giving up on her. And I want you to know that I won't either. Even if it takes the rest of my life, I won't stop searching. Even if you don't like what you find. Hitsugaya asked before he could stop himself. Kira blinked, then ducked his head. I'm used to disappointment by now, sir. There was little left to discuss after that, and so Hitsugaya took his leave. On his walk out of the office, he passed numerous Shinigami, all of whom made way respectfully for the small scowling soldier in the white cloak. None of their faces were familiar to him. They were not with Leopard, of that much he was certain. Ever since the end of the war, Toshiro made sure to familiarize himself with every single recruit under his command, regardless of strength or station. It wasn't like there were that many, really, even after combining the old 10th Division with the 8th. Ryako's words came back to him then. Was it true the academy was having fewer graduates every year? A troubling sign. Those born with spiritual power do not always host a Zanpakuto. I'd like to know more about that, actually. What does draw you to your wielders in the first place? We go where we are needed. That's not much of an answer. Isn't it? Do you not take comfort at the thought that something so simple could explain how you are blessed with the means to defend yourself and others? Life is hardly ever so convenient. I could ask the division that keeps track of these things. That would be Ibis now. Or you might hie yourself to the Arashi. They never left off their cataloging of our travels, if I recall. So what made you choose me, anyway? You were born in grief. I chose you to lessen that factor. Hitsugaya stopped in the middle of the street. Other pedestrians darted past him with great haste, compelled by the sense of an Arctic storm front building in that location. Have I upset you? How much of my past do you know, Hirin Meru? I am aware of precious little more than you. Don't act coy. Did you know my parents? No. Then what the hell can you tell me? Ask the one who would know best. This served to remind him of where he had been going next, and so Hitsugaya chose to end the conversation there. He flash-stepped across the roofs of the Court of Pure Souls, slipped through the western gate with only a flash of his coat for identification, and made his way into what had once been the first ring of the Rokanga, Junranin, now all but deserted. Only the direct family and close associates of the Shinigami remained here where once there had been a thriving center of commerce and industry. The small house in the woods remained exactly the same. Dried leaves crunched under his soft tabi shoes as he approached. There was the smell of wood smoke and home cooking in the air. Hardly a surprise. She always had a meal ready whenever one of them came home. All the same, Hitsugaya knocked on the door. Granny. Hello, my boy, her voice called back. Come in, I'll have supper ready in a bit. The boy captain smiled as he entered, taking off his shoes and resting Hirin Meru against a wall. He noted the small house remained clean but sparse. Granny had refused relocation to a halo, which was her right. She said she wanted to be here for them whenever they needed it. This place was home. Hitsugaya also noted a few other things. There was only one pair of shoes at the front entrance. And the doors leading off to their private rooms were closed. Nothing suspicious so far. He took a seat at the living room table. Soon enough his grandmother came bustling out of the kitchen, carrying a hot pot in her trembling arms. When he got up to take the heavy implement from her, she smiled gratefully. Welcome home, young man. Hey, Granny. He put the stew on the table and gave her the hug both of them needed. His grandmother had regained some of her previous plumpness from his younger days, but she still seemed disturbingly undernourished. Whenever he brought the topic up on his visits, she waved him off, insisting an old woman like her did better the less weight she had to carry around. Hitsugaya had always half-hoped his departure would help her get back to more stable health. In 25 years, that had not yet proven to be the case. How are things here? He asked when she moved to set the table, flatly refusing his help in that respect. There don't seem to be many people around. It's peaceful, the old woman assured him. I haven't had another soul come by since your last visit. But I can still get a hold of enough to get by. Guilt kept him silent as she continued. Regardless of his position in the afterlife, he should make more time to stop in and be there for her. Not like Granny had a lot of options for getting around on her own. Regular souls like her didn't need to eat the way Shinigami did. Still, there were other considerations for health besides food. Company meant a great deal. He, of all people, should know that. Soon enough there was a hearty meal set out before them. He and Granny set to, enjoying the piping hot broth chock full of meat, veggies, and spices. Money sent from 2 Shinigami officers over the years meant Granny could afford more than enough without having to forage in the woods like less fortunate people, even here in the relatively affluent first ring. They had lived simple, nondescript lives back before he and Momo graduated, though he could never recall actually going hungry at any time prior to that. Granny always managed to find a way to provide for her children. Which brings us to why I'm really here. Have you been sleeping well? She queried him suddenly. You look tired. You know what they say about getting a full night's rest. I'm taking naps most of the time, he reassured her, then quickly parried before she could make further comment. He didn't like to think she would hide anything from him, but this might just qualify. Granny, has Momo been by since last we spoke? His caregiver had a drink of tea, setting the cup down with a sad sigh. No, my dear. I haven't seen her. Have you? Has there been any word? None. Granny was one of the few people he had let in on the full truth regarding Momo. Not just her imprisonment under Nanao's curse, but also the things that led up to it, and what he suspected about her escape. This woman had raised both of them since birth, as far as he could tell. She deserved to know what was really going on where her charges were concerned. She must have gone to ground somewhere, he admitted bitterly. But other than here, I can't think of any place Hinamori would feel safe. And without her powers, she couldn't escape to the other realms. She's somewhere in Soul Society. I'm sure of that much. And I made sure the Halo security knows to keep an eye out for her, even if they don't know exactly why. As far as everyone else is concerned, I'm just looking to find our lost comrade. Poor Momo. She must be so afraid. Granny offered him seconds, which he accepted just to please her. It was time to ask the hard questions. Granny. She urgently indicated he should take a bite first. There was no choice but to comply. Once he had eaten a fair amount, the saintly old woman appeared satisfied. Yes, dear boy. Do you know who Momo's parents were? Her mouth opened, wrinkle-wrapped eyes squinting as though deep in thought. No. She said after a while. No, I never knew. There had to be more than just that. How did she come to be in your care? For just a second he almost asked, and how did I, but restrained himself at the last second. Granny's head tilted back and she stared at the thatch roof. There was a hint of trepidation in her voice when she spoke next. A man came to my door one night. He was no one I had ever seen before, certainly not from around here. He brought Momo with him. She was only a baby, a lovely little thing, so full of life. It was well known in the region that I had another forlorn child in my care, and he asked if I could see after her as well. I said yes. Did he say anything more? Hitsugaya pressed. Was he related to her? Can you remember anything about him? Was he a Shinigami? She looked flustered, perhaps at this barrage of questions, so Hitsugaya cut off his interrogation. Not a Shinigami, Granny eventually decided. No, you can always tell when one of them was around. They have such presence. This man was no death god. I believe, he must have been a servant. How could you tell? The servant class have a certain way of behaving, she explained. It's ingrained in them. He knew the proper way to address me, and even how to make his request. Still, I could tell he was desperate. I must have been a last resort. Granny had to take a moment to catch her breath before proceeding. Hitsugaya was so intent on this story he could have screamed at her to go faster. After a long sip of tea, she pressed on. He didn't strike me as being Momo's father, or anyone related to her for that matter. There was no warmth beyond what you would expect a good man to show towards a child not his own. He gave me a sum of money once I accepted her. To see to her care, he said. From that day on, once a month, I found a little bag by the door. It was just enough to live on without drawing notice to ourselves. Her tale seemed to end there, for the old woman grew silent. Hitsugaya pondered what he had learned. Do you still get the money every month? To his dismay, she shook her head. It stopped after you both joined the academy. So someone kept watch on us, or just Momo, enough to know when further cash wasn't needed anymore. They could have at least continued for Granny's sake, but maybe they figured the two of us would provide for her and didn't want to risk exposing themselves. Makes sense. They definitely didn't want to be found out. This trail's over 20 years cold. Another point occurred to him. How do you know so much about servants, Granny? She didn't seem surprised by his question. In my younger days, I helped run the household for a minor nobleman, but there was a scandal, and I had to be let go. Toshiro considered her answer. For the first time, it occurred to him how very little he knew about this elderly gentle soul. He had long suspected that she was not his actual grandmother. Granny was just a form of address adopted by two orphan children towards the only parental figure in their lives. Momo called her that as well, and she definitely wasn't any kin of his. So were we both left here? Granny said she was known for raising one orphan, which must have been why the man brought Momo to her. Could Hinamori have been the child of an aristocratic family, some noblewoman's unwanted get who dispatched their servant to rid them of a troublesome stain on the family name? Maybe they forgot all about her, and it was the servant who kept providing the money out of a sense of obligation. You do not ask. What? I thought you wanted to know more about your past. You've learned how Momo came to be here, why not the same for yourself? It wouldn't make any difference. If Granny knew something, she would have told me by now. I must have been left with her just like Momo. Hers is the only face you can remember, since your youngest days. That much I know. Look, I just wanted to make sure Momo wasn't here, all right? The rest is ancient history. You are wrong. There is a secret hanging over this house. Would I could divine it, but alas. I am not that clever. Just relax. I can handle not knowing. I've come this far. True. But the only person who can tell you won't live forever. This chilling statement caused him to take a closer look at Granny. Her face was sagging and wrinkled as ever, and she seemed so small. Were her cheeks always so pale? She seemed to have trouble carrying the pot out before. Is she? Granny? He asked, a note of fear in his voice. Are you doing all right? Of course, my dear. And she offered him a fond smile. I'm always good when you're here. That's not. In the end, he couldn't bring himself to betray his own misgivings, and the frosty-haired Shinigami decided not to insist on any more. I'm happy to see you too. He stayed a few hours longer, telling her all sorts of news about the Siridi, until it became apparent Granny was growing tired and he rose to depart. Doubtless there was more paperwork and a summons from Lord Commander Kukaki waiting upon his return. She fixed him a few snacks and sent the brave youth off with a loving kiss on the cheek, waving goodbye from the door of her hovel while dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. When he was gone, the old woman lay down on her pallet and wept. Xiomara struggled to breathe. She could feel the fire coursing up her mother's, and her skin, mindless and hungry, ignoring her screams as she fought to break free of the ropes that held her to the stake. Not now, she begged. Please, not yet, it's too important. I can't afford to be out of commission now. Please. Her eyes squeezed shut, tears of pain and grief refusing to fall. And right then, she felt a hand caress her cheek. When she opened her eyes, there was nothing but soft white light all around, filled with a heaven-sent noise that made her hell-marked soul rejoice. Her mother Susan was there, cupping her cherished child's face tenderly. Bliss filled every inch of the shapeshifter's being. She reached up to place warm brown fingers over that loving touch, not felt since before father's fall to damnation. Is this heaven? Xiomara. The hand she held was real, and it belonged to Rania. The gypsy girl's fangs were sunk deep in her arm, drawing Xiomara's blood into her as well in an attempt to avert or dilute the curse from. Oh, hello, Khan. Lying on her bed flipping through a manga, Karen's ears perked up. She bolted up and flew out into the hall, racing down the stairs and skidding to a halt before casually sauntering into the kitchen. Karen-chan, look. Her sister Yuzo called out upon spotting her. Khan's home. Hey, she threw out offhandedly before making her way to the refrigerator. Nice to see you too, little sister, he grinned. She got herself a glass and filled it with guava juice. Karen slumped against the wall and took a sip. She eyed Khan. He had on a white t-shirt and baggy jogging clothes so loud they hurt the eye. He still kept his hair cut to a bare fuzz around his head. What's up with you two lovely ladies? He asked, flopping into a chair and crossing his arms over the backrest. Graduation's coming up soon, right? Figured out where you're going off to college yet? Asano-senpai put in a recommendation for me at Hokkaido University, Yuzo said without a trace of boasting. She turned to give him a mischievous smile. She asked about you, Khan. There was a wealth of suggestion in her words. To Karen's surprise, Khan just smiled back. Mizuho, huh? I heard from her brother that she finally got her doctorate in business administration. She said she watched you in the World Outdoor Track and Field Championships, she supplied while setting before him a selection of gyoza dumplings with salted edamame to snack on. Mmm. Khan inhaled deeply with a beatific smile. Yuzo, I think your culinary skills have only improved over the years. When Karen let out a snort that managed to convey her opinion of men and their simple appetites, he insisted, I'm serious. You'll make someone a great wife someday. He failed to notice the way Karen's eyes narrowed at this comment, while Yuzo just laughed. Oh, I'm not in any hurry. I've had 3 boys confess to me since this term started already, so. She turned away and commenced seasoning some meat. Yeah. Khan paused with a 3rd dumpling halfway to his mouth. That many. His gaze drifted over to Karen, who made a show of being very interested in her juice. What about you, Yamato-chan? The boys must have come sniffing around at some point, your father and brother notwithstanding. That's a stupid question. She snapped, and leapt up to go stomping from the room. Leaving the house after he was finally here was not an option, so instead Karen flopped on the divan in the living room and busied herself with games on her phone. She could hear her sister and Khan still chatting, and tried to tune it out. Yuzo was graduating with high marks, and her score on the university entrance exams qualified her for some top schools. Her sister's interest in the paranormal had graduated to anthropology. She was always eager to discuss different cultures and the legends surrounding them. As for boys, they were just that. Boys. When the Kurosaki twins first started to mature physically, it drew a lot of attention from their peers, to be sure. Their father insisted Yuzo's figure closely paralleled their mother Masaki, for which Karen had kicked him in the nuts hard enough to change his vocal range for 3 days. He wisely chose not to comment on her maturation afterwards. But since they were both now 18, Karen reflected she and her sister had reached the limits of puberty. Yuzo had a good 3 inches on her now, but she could boast a significant advantage when it came to bust size. And she had a more athletic physique. Still, the younger Kurosaki sister could lay claim to having been approached by, and rejected, more potential suitors than her. That was probably due to the light curly hair, which her sibling had grown out to past shoulder length. Even as she thought this, Karen felt a hand ruffle her lank mop. Quit that. She smacked it away, swiveling around to glare. Just taking my licks. Khan laughed with that dopey grin on his face. Your sister chased me out when I sampled the Shawan mushy pudding. What ya up to? Nothing, she muttered, returning to her online pursuits. At the same time, Karen was glad she had decided to wear shorts today. They showed off her legs to best advantage. For further effect, she began kicking her heels lazily back and forth in slow, hypnotic fashion. Because that's what girls like to do in their free time, nothing. How would you know? She shot back, seeing an opportunity to fish for intel. You're not even dating anyone right now. A slight shuffling of his shoes was accompanied by a shaky laugh. Well, you got me there, Karen. She shoots, she scores. Karen turned off her phone and flipped over. Well, how about we help each other out then? He looked confused, as usual. How so? I've got nothing to do, you've got no one to do it with. She hopped upright, tucking the phone in a pocket. Take me out for a treat. Now his cat-like face had scrunched up on itself even further, pale blue eyes lost. Did I just miss something here? You've been away for much too long. Karen thrust a finger at his nose and left it hovering there like a sword point. I'm young, I'm free, and I demand attention. So treat me to something with all that money you've won from endorsements and betting on your own races. He stared at that menacing digit. Okay. Khan then pitched his voice a little higher. Yuzo, you wanna go out for? Busy. She called back from the kitchen. Everybody's coming over tonight, I need to cook. Karen sent a silent thanks to her sister. The teen then proceeded to hop around Khan to the front hall where she bent to tie on some shoes, grabbed her keys and coat and headed for the door. Move it or lose it, Kon. All right, I'm coming. Sheesh. There was a distraught look plastered on his face when he came running up. See how long that lasts. Karen remembered something then, and hurried back to a dresser stand in the lobby. Opening a drawer, she removed a red and blue glove and hurriedly stuffed it in her jacket pocket. Better safe than sorry. We'll be back in time for dinner. She called out before stepping into the fresh, sunny day. Perfect for running, racing, soccer, whatever you wanted. The sky's the limit. They walked for a while, not saying much. A comment about changes in the neighborhood, letting some preschool-age kids go running by them laughing, it was good to be out. So what does Aunt Karen feel like doing, then? She ran a hand through her hair with a groan. Don't start. Shinobu was just a feint. He lulled us into a false sense of security, made the family think little kids were easy to manage. Then his sister Hirako came along, and suddenly we're all running ragged trying to keep up with her. She has limitless energy. I never changed a single diaper with either of them, and I am not ashamed to admit it. So you're on terror-tot duty whenever they visit, I take it, he chuckled good-naturedly. You'd know if you were around more than once in a blue moon. That was a mistake. She could see right away as Kon's gaiety vanished like it had never existed. He looked unbelievably ashamed. I'm giving them space, the mod soul mumbled. Can't be easy for Ichigo and Rukia raising a family, certainly wouldn't help having me hanging around like a third wheel or something. They deserve to be happy. All of them. He's still hung up on Rukia. After so many years, what was it with this guy? I didn't mean to bring you down, she quickly sought to explain. You know we're always glad to see you, Kon. Especially me. He perked up a trifle, managing a wan smile. Thanks, little sister. Karen decided to call it even for that and proceeded on her way, striding down the street with a frustrated determination. Where are we going? He asked after a while. There's a cafe that opened up a few blocks from here, she informed him without looking back. I've been meaning to hit it up, but didn't have anyone to go with. Well, happy to offer my company and my fortune, then. You are definitely paying. And not just because I forgot my wallet, she added silently. Fortunately their destination proved to be only a few minutes walk away by then. Kon could have made it here and back home in under a second, probably. The Kakao Cafe was a small shop on the far edge of the business district, smack in between the residential and corporate clientele. A prime location, and one that had paid off well, by the look of it. There were several couples and lone warriors sitting under the awnings outside enjoying their fare or typing away on laptops. A wrought iron fence encircled the patio dining area, and flowers sprouted in abundance. Specials of the day were written on a blackboard outside, along with pithy daily sayings to charm the guests. Today's was, "A sweet tooth is a sweet truth." Brilliant. They took a seat outside in a corner table, where a waitress in a frilly outfit brought them menus. Karen was feeling nervous, and the kitschy locale wasn't helping. Why did I suggest this place when I've never even been here? It's for middle school kids and underclassmen. I don't even know what to order. How is this supposed to work? Say something before he does. Quick. I'm thinking about studying abroad. She blurted out. To her embarrassment, he gave her a disbelieving look and said, Why? Karen traced a finger over the blunt spikes on the fence. So that I can, see the world. Isn't that what you did while you were away? Yeah, but I had a few other things to keep me occupied while trying to get my life in order. Kon glanced around. The other customers were sufficiently far away to limit the possibility of eavesdropping. Nonetheless, he scooted his chair around until he was closer to Karen to lean in. Her initial exultation at pulling this off without even trying quickly turned to dismay, as Karen realized being so near to him only left her feeling even more like a clumsy naive doofus. Her guardian picked up the conversation without picking up on anything else. Aren't you worried about missing out on your family? I know with modern appliances you can keep in touch with people a world away through video chat and stuff, but that's no substitute for real human contact, believe me. Kyojaku and Hirako. Shinobu, she corrected him. He's Shinobu in public. Or Jaku, as a nickname. Jaku, then. The kids want to see their aunts. And you'll kick yourself in the future if you go globe-trotting and miss out on those little tykes when they're at their cutest. He gave her a knowing look before starting to peruse the menu. I know I'm sorry to have sat out a big part of your life. Not like you missed much. She didn't want him sinking into a funk again. High school was pretty regular compared to what we went through in middle school. Well, I mean, there was that whole mess with Mayor Oka's new heads will roll educational policy, but... What? Khan gave her a look of utter disbelief. Oh, you didn't hear about that? Ichigo's old teacher, Misato Oki, she got appointed vice governor of the province about a year ago. See, she somehow arranged for it to be legal for teachers to publicly execute problem students in schools. Nobody knew how, but by the time the national news picked up on it, his mouth was so wide she could count his teeth. It was pretty funny, actually. It was a huge thing. The teachers' unions were all behind it, the parents were up in arms, and nobody was listening to the students. I don't remember any actual incidents, but to make a long story short, they couldn't make her step down because of tenure apparently, so instead the governor agreed to give Mayor Oka the position of vice governor. Which means if he resigns or dies, then she'll be in charge. She agreed, and the law was rescinded. For now. A quick shake of his head seemed to snap Khan out of his trance. That's... He blew out his breath and wiped a hand over his perspiring forehead. Okay, anybody else, I'd say you were pulling my leg, but that woman, there's something about her. God help us if she dies and becomes a hollow, she'd probably be Vastolord right off the bat. Yeah, Ichi said something similar. Apparently Dr. Ishida is keeping an eye on the governor to make sure he doesn't have any accidental run-ins with hollows. You know, like they find his body in the woods and assume wild dogs got him or something. Karen grinned when he appeared queasy. Maybe this whole chatting thing isn't as tricky as I thought. Mizuho-senpai said he was very easy to talk to once you got the ball rolling. And she had never had any problems talking with Khan before. The waitress returned soon after, and they gave their orders. Karen chose a concoction floating in hot fudge, whipped cream, and a crumble cake base, while Khan opted for a large mint frappe. He even agreed to share if her own selection proved less than stellar. To pass the time, they both ordered cappuccinos. Karen glanced furtively around when their drinks came. Do people assume we're on a date? I didn't really have time to change my clothes, and he certainly didn't expect to be going out with me when he arrived. They probably just see a guy and a girl talking and assume we're friends. Nothing more. So if I want to change that opinion, I need to shift the topic to something more mature. So have you heard anything about the wedding? He looked up from stirring cream into his cup. I'm surprised you know about that. Why wouldn't I? Karen frowned. Well, it's... He hesitated. Hang on. Who are you talking about? Ishida and Ogawa. Who are you? Same. Khan couldn't lie to save his life, so she knew something was up. But he started talking right away, which meant any grilling would have to wait. Yeah, that's right. His clothing business made a big deal about displaying the wedding dress. He has the exclusive rights for Wanderer and Shadows merch. But he takes commissions for other stuff. Anyway, yeah, they made it official. Once the anime wraps up, they're getting married. It's going to be a huge celebration, and they're making it a public event. For the fans, or whatever. I'm sure we'll all be invited when the time comes. By that point he'd stirred so much cream in his coffee it qualified as yogurt. Karen had brought him here with a certain intent, but now her natural feminine curiosity was raised, and she wasn't about to back down. Khan. His head jerked up, pale blue eyes huge and quivering. Yeah. Who else is getting married? For a few seconds it appeared as though he was deeply considering running for the hills as a last resort. But at last he slumped in his seat with a crestfallen air and admitted, my big sis, Kyokaku. And Katsura Arashi. They're finally getting hitched. Oh. She had to think back a bit for that one. Karen had met Khan's adopted older sister back when Karakura was nearly destroyed in a war between Hollows and Shinigami. A nice lady, and hard to forget. The man Katsura was the same one who nearly married Rukia, until her brother and Kon both called him out over it and Kon wound up the winner. Since then he had been involved with Rukia purely in a business sense, but he switched his sights to Kyokaku shortly after. Kon didn't talk about it much over the years, so she assumed there wasn't much to tell. But apparently that was no longer the case. Why the secrecy? She asked. Are they eloping or something? No. He actually seemed glad to get this off his chest. But it's a huge to-do. Big Sis wasn't certain about whether his intentions were honorable at first. She's gotten used to looking down on the nobility, and them on her, so she thought he might be working an angle. Katsura and I still keep in touch. I never tried to influence her, though. That wouldn't have ended well for me. Here Kon rubbed his head absently, as though nursing an old injury. But he finally won her over. And I'm glad for it. I think they'll make a good match. His clan's all behind it. They'd have to be, or I think he might execute them. Still, this is a big deal for the Siriti. Kinda like, healing old wounds. Looking to the future. That sort of thing. Yeah, she agreed quickly, sensing an opening. You shouldn't let how you've always seen someone. I mean, if they've changed, and you didn't notice, but they do. For some reason the clear, logical argument that sprung up in her brain refused to make it past her lips. Karen rallied to give it another shot nonetheless. If they're still thinking of you how you used to be, but you're not that way anymore, and you want them to stop treating you like you always were when you were together, even if you were happy the way you. Either he was stupid or she was, because Kon just stared at her like she had switched to Mandarin sometime in the last 10 seconds. Right then, however, their waitress returned and settled their orders in front of them. Thank you very much. She offered with a bow, and headed back indoors. Karen gave up and started eating. Her companion apparently decided against inquiring any further and did the same. Her selection proved to be pretty tasty, so there was no need to trade with him. Or maybe I should. Isn't that something from those clunky romance shows Yuza watches? Sharing a treat, and one of you gets ice cream on your cheek, and they wipe it off, or lick it. You two make a cute couple. Kon sputtered so hard he lost half his frappe on the table. Realizing they were the target of that comment, Karen swung around in challenge. We're not a. The automatic denial was halfway out her mouth before she even had time to think. Realization of this made her flush with equal parts humiliation and disappointment with herself. In response, the source of this inner turmoil laughed and hopped over the railing to join them. What's up, kids? Tatsuki Arisawa greeted them with a triumphant grin. Hey. Kon quickly scooted over to make room for her between them. Tatsuki-san, I didn't know you'd be in town. My schedule's pretty packed, sure. The lean fighter snagged a chair and lifted it one-handed over their heads to plop down at the table. But I wanted to see how everyone was doing. She paused to look Kon up and down, and gave a snort. Still dressing to impress, I see. It was true. By contrast, the winner of the last 3 Long Beach International Karate Championships looked as though she had just come from a photo shoot. She had on a white mini-skirt with huge gold-looped chains for a belt. The leather jacket slung over one shoulder was Coke bottle green and supple as sin. Her shoes were just regular trainers, but that long-sleeved black blouse was silk, with a V-neck collar down to her sternum, huge ruffles around the opening, and tapered sleeves whose cuffs hung down to offer peaks of both her wrists and muscular forearms. And those were designer shades atop her head, or I'm a Shinigami. Some of us like to keep a low profile and stay out of the public eye, he retorted back, wiping mint ice cream off his chin. No kidding, Tatsuki chuckled back. She was clearly enjoying his humiliation, and the murmurs and stares they were getting from other customers. Yes, so if you're done causing a scene. You missed a spot. Tatsuki then leaned over and, completely unasked for, licked a green line off Kon's neck. Karen felt her stomach lurch. Next thing she knew the teen was on her feet, about to scream, hands off him. But then she realized how this must look, a teenage girl wearing off-the-rack clothes with a cheap haircut standing next to this mature fitness goddess in tailor-made attire that would turn any man's head. And Tatsuki's a friend, what the hell am I thinking? The whole situation from start to finish struck her as absolutely nuts, and without a word Karen spun about and stalked out of the restaurant. "Karen!" Khan called after her. "Hold on, I still need to pay." "You two catch up," she responded over her shoulder. "I'm going to help you Zoe. See you at dinner." With that she jammed her hands in her pockets and commenced a moody solo trek home, where no one could ogle her or comment on this whole shameful debacle. Distraught, Khan looked about to plunk down some cash and take off after her, but a firm hand on his wrist prevented any such actions. "Where do you think you're going?" Arisawa asked softly, her calm tone belied by hooded eyes and mean smirk. "We've been trying to get in touch with you for a while now." "I was busy," he retorted, tensing at her apparent hostility. "As you could clearly see. Be glad I came when I did." That girl was eyeing you like a T-bone steak she was about to sink her teeth into. Khan's normally affable gaze turned momentarily chilly. "That's not funny." "I wasn't making a joke," she retorted, voice dropping an octave and eyes narrowing in implicit threat. "If you lay a finger on her, or vice versa, I think you're letting your true colors show a bit too much, aka ONI." The aptly titled Red Demon of the martial arts world regarded him in silence for a bit longer, then grinned. "Ah, you're so cute when you play the hero, Khan." And she patted him high on the thigh, adding a slow caress that made her lover jump. Several other patrons turned away in cultural embarrassment, while a few surreptitiously sought to snap pictures of what might be two famous people seen together in public. "And don't worry. I've got 'em all under control. But the boss still wants a word. So you better hop to it if you're going to be back in time for dinner." He fidgeted, but ultimately peeled some bills off a stack in his wallet and plunked them down on the table. She let him stand without resistance then, and Khan threw her a sardonic look. "Let's hit the gym later. You seem like you need to work out some aggression." "Happy to kick your ass," the martial artist sang. He took off at an easy lope down the street, switching to turbo mode once he rounded a corner. She felt Khan's soul diminish into the distance. There was little chance she wouldn't see him again that day. They didn't want to call any more attention to themselves. The business in South America a few years back had never yielded the intense scrutiny she expected, so maybe their cover hadn't been blown. Noboru was a nice kid, but he wasn't a genius. The secret she and Khan shared remained intact. Well, one of them, at any rate. Perhaps it was out of immature spite that Tatsuki Arisawa chose to finish off the sweet repast Karen had left behind. She always accepted a challenge, but this was one girl whose teeth she couldn't kick in, nor did she want to. There was no pride in beating up on a poor high school kid with a crush. Absently she picked up the long spoon Khan left and bent it into a pretzel between the fingers of one hand. At least, for now. Right then her phone rang. She pressed a button and held it to her ear. "Hello. Tatsuki-chan. It's me, Misato-sensei. Listen, would you be able to spare a holo or two, say, Monday around 8 p.m. "No." And she hung up. An itch between his shoulder blades was the first sign something was up. Ichigo Kurosaka stood against the wall watching his kendo students go through their forms. He liked what he saw, strong grasp of the fundamentals in most cases, while the more talented students were developing their own styles, concentrating intently. There were no half-hearted shouts at the Zoemitsu dojo. They had a promising crop this year. To say he envied them would not be a lie, though the admission shamed him still. That sense of restlessness made him more aware of what his body was trying to tell him. He caught the eye of another instructor and indicated she could take over. With that Ichigo snagged his shina and stepped out of the dojo into a brisk sunlit day. He strolled to a small outdoor training yard they used when the gym became too stiflingly hot during the summer. There he began to practice his swing, falling into an easy rhythm that years of repetition had built up, allowing him to concentrate more on other matters. Since learning Kido from Nanao, his admittedly dull spiritual senses had experienced a marked progression. He was now not quite so hopeless when it came to singling out spectral sources, though he lacked the refined pinpoint accuracy both she and his father boasted. Still, even now he could tell a large source of powerful energy was approaching him. Ichigo quickly made sure he had a Jikangan dispenser and his cell phone handy. He then waited patiently for whatever it might be to draw closer. Kurosaki Ichigo. He glanced up, still performing his swings, and was surprised to find none other than Toshiro Hitsugaya floating above the building. "Captain Hitsugaya!" he exclaimed. "What brings you by?" There was no one outside to watch, but he still kept up the kendo, in case one of his students should happen to glance out a window. He was far enough away that they shouldn't be able to pick out his words. "I came to see you." The snowy-haired savant descended until he touched down to earth, looking up at the tall 20-something now. "It's good to find you well, Kurosaki-san." The welcoming words didn't match his severe frown. There was always a sense of challenge in the youngest captain's whole posture, as though he was long used to having to prove himself to anyone who happened to cast aspersions on his rank. Or who just happened to be taller. Same here. Though not exactly fast friends, he and Toshiro fought against the Vasto Lord Ulquiorra Schiffer during the Autumn War, and the kid had protected Rukia and several of his classmates during that debacle in the caves of Hueco Mundo. Not to mention fighting the Wild Hunt at Kyojaku's birth. For this he felt closer to him than most of the other captains of Soul Society. Plus when it came to being judged based solely on your youth, hair color, and general appearance, he was a kindred spirit. They had that much in common. "If this is a bad time, I can come back later," Hitsugaya suggested with grave courtesy. "No, it's cool. I can chat." Still swinging his shina, he flicked a smile at the youthful warrior. "Unless we're attacked by some super-powerful demonic soul sucker, of course." A small grin made those emerald eyes a shade less frosty. "You do have that tendency," he agreed. Then the boy captain lapsed back into a professional demeanor. "But no, I'm here because I wanted to discuss the prospect of us training together." "Really?" Ichigo blinked sweat from his eyes. "Hadn't seen that coming. Wait, I thought I remembered Noboru complaining about you already training under Byakuya." He seemed a little jealous, from what I could tell. "It's not the same thing." The haunted look that fell over him then let Ichigo know not to broach that topic again. "Actually, my tutelage under Captain Kukaki hasn't yielded the results I hoped for. At least, not in any meaningful way. I've got a better understanding of the concepts concerning Shinigami and our fundamental purpose, inner peace and focus, that sort of thing, but..." Hitsugaya seemed restless and dodgy. In fact, this type of clear insecurity made him look his apparent age more than anything else. Uncertainty, confusion, an inability to express yourself clearly, all typical aspects of adolescence. Ichigo had to resist the urge to playfully ruffle his hair like he did his kid sisters back when they were going through this type of thing. "You would lose a hand." "Thanks, old man Zanjitsu, think I'm crippled enough for one life. I would not be so quick to castigate myself were I you." "Whatever. Say, come to think of it." Another salient point had leapt out that served to harden him. "So what you're saying is, Byakuya can't cut the mustard as a tutor, and you'd like to go a few rounds with me?" Toshiro looked up and squared his jaw. "If you can spare the time. I know you have a family to look after." "There's no hurry." No, I'm good. Now's good. Actually, this is perfect for me. I haven't had much of a chance to swing the old soul chopper around these past few years. Not many hollows in my neck of the woods, you know? I could seriously use the exercise. Nice to find something the almighty Lord Commander Kukaki wasn't perfect at. Are you going to inform Nanao? She's my sensei, not my mother. She doesn't have to know everything. All the same, you should have a second. If you insist on viewing this in terms of a match, that would be advisable. Fine, I'll give her a call and ask her to meet me at the training center. Happy? No answer came back. Feeling elated at the prospect of testing his mettle, the young parent called Nanao to inform her of this occurrence, then went inside to make excuses to his boss Azuma about ducking out early. She was more than willing to let him leave an hour ahead of time, considering his family state. The owner of the Zoemitsu dojo had been unfailingly considerate of Ichigo ever since his career in the sport was forcibly ended. It had made the circuit rounds, promising kendo candidate crippled in practice match. Few news outlets who picked up on the story commented on the fact that the person responsible for his disabling injury had disappeared off the face of the earth. Officials in the sporting world lamented the loss of a potential star, and those he had squared off against in the past sent their condolences, but their words rang hollow. An honorary rank of 5th Dan was bestowed on him, despite the fact that he had not reached the required 10-year goal post. Ichigo Kurosaki would never attain the level of 8th Dan in the sport. A bitter realization, to be a has-been who never would be at his age. And he found himself faced with the sudden loss of a livelihood that could serve to support his family. Ichigo had never deluded himself into thinking he could rise to the top of the competitive world, like Tatsuki and Kon had in their arenas. But still, he had grown to love kendo over the years. Loved the sense of one-on-one combat, the excitement of watching a rousing match between two competitors he himself might have to challenge, and the satisfaction that came from helping other kendo enthusiasts hone their craft and win matches themselves. Teamwork, camaraderie, sharing the highs and lows, that was what made group sports such a joy. It was a small blessing he had rediscovered in high school after having long avoided such communal activities following his mother's death. What was left served to bring him as much pain as pleasure. He had no intention of living off Azuma's kindness forever. A man had his pride, and continuing to support a practically useless instructor who could barely get through a match himself could only bring financial hardship on the already precarious dojo. They deserved better than that. They deserved better than him. Your friends and family will never desert you, no matter what. That's not the issue. I have to contribute. It's part of our culture. Regardless, you are among the living. Do not permit yourself to lose sight of your worth in favor of spiritual performance. I appreciate the pep talk, but I'm doing fine. This is just to help out a friend. A troubled silence was Zanjitsu's only response. He and Toshiro didn't chat much on the way to the warehouse district where the Vazard once made their headquarters. It would look awkward to anyone without spiritual sense, and even then, well. It wasn't a long trip, only 15 minutes, but already his knee was acting up so that he had to fight not to limp. Eventually they came at last to the boarded-up storage building. Ichigo felt his heart race with excitement. Why am I getting so worked up? Besides, this won't take much longer than an hour. Dinner's on, and Toshiro's got business of his own to get back to, obviously. Ichigo leveraged a board aside to gain entry, wincing slightly as his knee protested this strenuous activity, while Toshiro just passed effortlessly through the wall. He had to remind himself this was not done to show him up. Kid probably doesn't even know about my injury. They made their way to the underground training center, where Nanao Ise was already waiting for them. She looked up from where she sat reading a book on what looked to be a small settee. The design of this semi-spiritual abode now looked like the inside of a great hollow pyramid, with sloping black walls and floors that shone like polished obsidian. Blue torches hanging in midair gave the place a surreal, haunting aspect, as though they really were standing within some ancient Egyptian pharaoh's final resting place. Other than that, there was nothing to be seen. Thanks for coming, sensei, he greeted her with a toothy grin. I am always happy to observe your progress, Ichigo-san. She flipped closed her book and rose to her feet. Welcome, Captain Hitsugaya. Hi. For some reason the kid had ducked his head and was looking anywhere but at Nanao. Ichigo glanced down at his tiny sparring partner in puzzlement. That's weird. Never knew he was so bashful around women. His old lieutenant was, like, the definition of hot homewrecker mistress. Toshiro's sudden insecurity seemed odd. Oh, well, no big deal. They can work out their differences while we work up a sweat. If she jumps me in front of him, my career is ruined. I see we are still traumatized over that evening, which you cannot even remember. I remember enough. There was lots of skin, maybe some belly dancing. I think they made me play a slave boy. You kept the cat ears. Only to use as evidence in case. Well, never mind. Back to our real reason for being here. Ichigo Kurosaki had already abandoned his physical body and now stood with Zanjitsu unsheathed, ready to proceed. He and Nanao conferred together for a time, perhaps discussing the rules she no doubt had prepared for just such an occasion. Then that fiery hot female slipped over to stand in front of the captain. She gazed down at him with a severe, unreadable expression, those deep blue eyes pinning him to the floor like a bug. Captain, she stated crisply, causing him to give a shamefaced start. I see you accepted a Lemaitre seal before traveling to the human realm, as is customary. However, for this proceeding, I think it wisest to remove such a restriction. Kurosaki Ichigo possesses great power even for a captain class. We should observe how an unfettered match between you plays out before considering such a handicap. Do you consent to this? Oh, now you ask for my consent, huh? Out loud he said, yes, that sounds reasonable. Good. I will now remove the seal. Her voice was cool and businesslike as ever. For his part, Toshiro stood ramrod straight as Nanano knelt before him. Please open your coat slightly, Captain. Oh. Okay. Nervously the kid hooked a thumb in the collar of his white Haori and black Shinigami war suit to tug it down a bit, displaying the smallest amount possible of smooth pale skin. The sexy librarian bent closer. She inspected the glowing daffodil emblem revealed there. He could see it reflected in her glasses. In fact, they were so close he could swear he heard her heartbeat. Or was that his own? Nanao murmured an incantation as she placed warm fingertips against his skin, and he couldn't suppress a shiver. Her magic flowed into him. Hitsugaya felt heady, certain that his cheeks were burning red. Those lilac-colored eyes flickered to meet his own sea-green ones. Fight for my amusement, slave boy. He jerked slightly, uncertain if that whispered comment was real or in his imagination. Then Nanao stood up and stepped back. His full power rushed into him, a thrilling force almost sexual in nature, come to think of it. Hitsugaya had never been more grateful to be wearing pants with a lot of room in them. We shall conduct this as an official duel between two captains, their designated referee called as she stepped between them, looking from one to another. You will engage in combat for 10 minutes this first round. The chamber we are in is adjacent to the mortal plane, so there will be no risk of damaging the environment. You may fight unrestrained. Kido spells are permitted, but Bankai cannot be used until the 10 minutes are up. Are we clear on this? Toshiro felt the anticipation that came from facing a dangerous opponent. The old 10th Division had been a disciplinary unit, unlike other Shinigami, who focused on killing hollows. They received additional special training to battle against rogue death gods themselves. Which only made his initial loss to Aizen many years ago so galling. And Momo's treacherous incapacitation of him during the Autumn War. And the fight with Jin. No, forget all that. Focus on the here and now. The leader of Leopard Squad gripped the handle of Hyurin Meru, loosening it slightly in its sheath. He already had a fair idea of how to begin this fight, considering his opponent. Ichigo stood across from him in traditional Shinigami apparel, scorning the mystic body armor that was now de rigueur for all death gods. Zanjutsu was already in Shikai, as was his wont. The oversized Zanpakuto rested on his shoulder, binding bandages sliding down to the floor. It might be considered unfair, but... Nanao's arm swept down. Begin. Hado #69. Toshiro called out quickly. Silver 2. Ongyu striking ASP. The final syllables of the spell caught in the captain's mouth as a glowing gray band of energy encircled his throat, imprisoning any further magic from exiting. There was no time to consider this unexpected development, as a giant kitchen knife swung at his face. Hitsugaya jerked his head to one side, feeling that gargantuan weapon ruffle his hair as it passed over him. At the same time he spun on one heel, drawing his weapon in one smooth stroke and lashing out lightning quick, aiming for his opponent's legs, a disabling cut. Instead he felt a jarring shock run up his arms as Hyurin Meru rebounded off a glowing blue wall. Was that Seiki? When did he cast? Don't tell me. Sleeping Kido, Ichigo grinned gleefully, and elbowed him in the face. Hitsugaya's head snapped back. He staggered a few paces off, half dizzy with pain. It felt like a steel club had connected with his skull. This guy is too damn strong. And since when does Ichigo Kurosaki use Kido, much less advanced techniques like sleeping? Since Nanao Ise became his Kido instructor. Now fight. How's that? Ichigo Kurosaki stood in a relaxed pose as before, sword on shoulder and hand on his hip wearing a satisfied smirk. Nanao told me what to expect from you, so I planned ahead, he called out. She said the 10th prefers quick disabling moves. So, How was it? That smile turned nasty in a second. Did it remind you of getting your ass kicked by Aizen? You would know, Hitsugaya shot back. The substitute Shinigami just chuckled and shook his head. Yeah. I would. Hitsugaya rolled his jaw from side to side, feeling the ache of potential fracture. The spell muting his magic was not perfectly cast, but the sheer power behind it more than made up for that. He'd never be able to break it, at least not without going Bankai. And that was forbidden. For the time being, he would have to rely on his other skills. The captain considered his opponent anew and this time allowed him. He had expected Ichigo Kurosaka to be a powerful fighter, on par with the Kenpeki. What he hadn't anticipated was this level of precision, much less psychological warfare. That crack about Aizen had indeed shaken him. For just a moment he could almost feel Kyoka Suijutsu slicing through his back once again. The difference in their strength, being at a disadvantage, the willingness to strike him where it hurt the most. This is what I need. Hitsugaya Toshiro's face cleared, and he stood erect to regard his enemy calmly, Hyarin Mara held before him in both hands. In a flash his Zanpakuto entered its Shikai, without need for incantation as only captain-class fighters could boast. The temperature inside the tomb plummeted. A wall of ice formed in front of him, and a gleaming harvest moon sickle now swung from the chain attached to Hyarin Mara's hilt. Ready to go again. Ichigo drawled casually through the frosty barrier. Like he had all day, and didn't really care. Come on, then, Toshiro replied. A heartbeat later the human was gone, and the young Shinigami spun around just in time to block another overwhelming stroke. Their blades clanged roughly against each other. Hitsugaya felt himself knocked back from the sheer force behind the blow, and he had barely recovered his footing before another came shearing towards him from the other side. This too he managed to intercept, but doing so blew him off his feet to go flying through the air. Damn it, this guy's a colossus. It's all I can do to deflect his attacks, there's no way I can match it blow for blow. Teeth gritted, he sought to keep track of his unervingly fast opponent, who flash-stepped not behind, or even to the side, but below, striking at his legs. In response Toshiro tugged on Hyarin Mara's chain with his foot, sending the scythe snapping at Ichigo's face for a moment fast enough to make him automatically block. By then Hitsugaya had finally prepared a suitable response. He noticed Nanao Ise and Jige Ichigo watching from below, protected in a shimmering shell of falling mountain crystal and what looked like several other enchantment layers beneath it. They should be safe. Tenso Jurin. He shouted. The effect was instantaneous. Ice began to form everywhere, on the floor, hanging like stalagmites from the tilted ceiling, and even in thin layers all over Ichigo's body. The human grimaced and shook himself, sending transparent sheets sloughing off in layers. More built up, though, as Hyarin Mara's power established dominion over the very elements that existed in this room. Pretty cheap move. The human accused, trembling already. You haven't seen anything yet, he shot back, and whipped his Zanpakuto over one shoulder before giving a mighty swing forward. There then exploded from the frosty blade a serpentine dragon made of ice which dove towards Ichigo with an almost audible screech. In response, the substitute Shinigami raised his weapon overhead and responded in kind. Getsuga Tensho. The blast of raw spiritual energy that followed blew through Hyarin Mara's attack like it was a snow cone. Toshiro had no illusions of facing such an assault head-on, and instead flew towards the ceiling to avoid it. The awesome blast connected with the side of the pyramid, where it dissipated with a splash of spirit particles. Hitsugaya took note. What was this place made of, anyway? Some kind of death stone. He certainly didn't feel any sort of drain on his powers. Can I use that to my advantage? You have 8 minutes before my Bankai becomes an option. If at all possible, I'd like to avoid us both going that far on this first occasion. Then one of you must claim victory before then. Any ideas? Because I never expected him to be half this devious, to say nothing of strong. He has clearly been training with the intent of crossing swords against Aizen one day. Ichigo wants there to be no disadvantages against him in that future battle. And he has far surpassed the strength we saw on display during our battle with Ulquiorra. Admirable. And I haven't, I suppose? Perhaps, like Aizen, you can find a way to turn that power to your advantage. It seems to take him some time to collect himself after major attacks like that last one. Or you can use the terrain to your advantage. Don't space out. Another Getchuga Tensho came roaring his way. He dodged again and was about to commence a counter-attack, only for a second smaller flash to alert him to bring up his blade. Just in time, as a ragged beam slammed against the sharpened edge, screeching and crackling, leaving his fingers numb. Was that a casting of Byakurai? He suckered me, guessed which way I would dodge and threw in the Kido. Even as he realized this, Ichigo appeared before him, that tremendous warblade howling down in a killing stroke. Hiranmaru nearly slipped from his throbbing fingers, and in desperation Hitsugaya grabbed the chain along its length and snapped it taut between them. Zanjutsu smashed through the links, Hiranmaru's Shikai snapped, and the black blade slammed into Hitsugaya's shoulder, sending him cartwheeling end over end into the floor with a resounding crash and an explosion of ice. Flurries and white clouds covered the snowy floor. Hitsugaya Teiku. Nanao cried. Are you alright? She shot an accusing look at Ichigo, who waved off her concerns. Relax, sensei, I'm not crazy here, he called down. I hit him with the back of the sword. Went all, Himura the Batusai, on I'm. Then he called, yo, Snowflake. Ready to throw in the towel. His eyes roamed over the battlefield, searching through drifts of ice and snow. In response, he heard a tearing sound. Moments later Toshiro Hitsugaya stood up. He had removed his white haori and torn half into strips which he then wound and looped like a large sling in one hand. What was left he shrugged back into one-armed, the symbol of leopard division still clear on its back. Let's try that again, you bastard, the captain spoke quietly. Give me your best shot. And he launched himself into the air, heading straight for Ichigo. I like it. Kurosaka cried, and lifted his godly weapon on high once more. Getchuga Tensho. A bright arc of moonlit destruction blazed forth to engulf the captain. To his surprise, Toshiro made no move to avoid it. Instead he spread his torn coat in front of him like a shield and drove forward, meeting the blast head-on. Moonlit Fang warped, and then went careening by him with no more resistance than a feather. Ichigo had only a moment to process this impossible sight before the boy was upon him. He swung the long loop of fabric, letting go of one end as he did, seeking to snag and entangle Zanjutsu in its folds. Ichigo slashed the cloth contemptuously, but to his disbelief, it would not cut. Instead the ragged strip wound around the giant blade. The heck? There was no time to question, as Hiranmaru licked out. He managed to parry the gleaming ice sword, knocking it aside with the flat of his blade. Doing so caused Hitsugaya to lose his balance and let go of his improvised whip. Lightning-fast Kurosaka lashed out with a kick to the midsection that sent him flying back. Even as the boy captain righted himself and leapt to attack again, Ichigo swung up his sword and brought it down with a bellow. Getchuga Tensho. Expecting a titanic outpouring of energy, he instead found himself lurching clumsily forward under the impetus of his own overswing, as absolutely nothing happened. Ichigo hung bent over in that awkward pose, and felt cold steel press against his throat. Yield. His eyes traveled up to meet those of Toshiro Hitsugaya, who stared back with a smirk even as he held the tip of Hiranmaru against his opponent's neck. What just happened? The substitute Shinigami asked in tones of amazement. That snowy head nodded to one side. Take a look at your sword. He did so. At first all Ichigo could make out was the torn remnants of the captain's jacket. Then something leapt out at him. In addition to that snow-white fabric, there was something else, another color, almost identical, but not quite as pristine. Then it hit him. Zanjutsu's bandages. Yeah. Hitsugaya withdrew his weapon and slid it back into its sheath, returning to a sealed form as he did. I picked them up while you were arguing with Nanao. Your soul cutter is always unleashed in Shikai, never sealed. But every Shinigami at the academy is taught that a Zanpakuto comes with both a blade and a scabbard. He indicated the hilt over his shoulder. They act as a constraint. That's why it's always necessary to draw your weapon before performing first release. At first glance you don't seem to have one. But then I thought, maybe he does. He then reached down and tugged the torn bandage dangling off Zanjutsu's wrapped haft. and a Zanpakuto's scabbard can serve to restrain or even block its power. I gambled on these doing the trick. Huh. Ichigo peeled off the wrapping and inspected his bared weapon thoughtfully. Never knew about that. He threw a glance at Toshiro and grinned. You really are a prodigy, huh? Record graduation time from the academy, in case you didn't know. Cool. Only see, the thing is. And here Ichigo's smile turned sinister. I never surrendered. He then drew a deep breath and roared, Bankai. Black energy exploded out, driving Toshiro back. Tensa Zanjutsu. When it cleared, Ichigo stood in his ragged floor-length overcoat holding the black katana that was his second release. Bankai. Daiguren Hyarin Meru. A similar outpouring of white spiritual power blossomed in the ancient tomb. Revealed at its heart was a boy with talons and claws of ice, the wings and tail of a dragon sprouting from his back. That wasn't 10 minutes. Toshiro snapped. Meh, you know how these extra-dimensional gigs screw up time, yeah? Ichigo shrugged while tapping the back of his sword against one shoulder. You go into one portal heading to Soul Society, come back, and it's last Tuesday. Or so Kisuk tried to explain to me. I always figured he was just jabbering to hear himself speak. Never made much sense to me. He then pointed the ebon sword at his frosty foe. Ready to get real? Hitsugaya smiled. Always. They were just preparing to do battle, when a sharp voice cried, enough. From the walls of the pyramid there shot several black cylinders which hummed as they formed a connection. A moment later, the ring of Deathstone activated to drain all spiritual energy within the temple. There then came identical thuds as both fighters hit the floor with violent force. They lay there groaning and cursing as Nanao Ise walked over, picking up both their fallen weapons and handing them to Ichigo's Jigai, who accepted them obediently. When I lay down rules, the sorceress informed them severely from her elevated height, I expect them to be obeyed. From now on you will spar with one another only under my supervision, and then with very severe limitations, until I determine you both mature enough not to cost one another's lives. She went stalking off, taking their confiscated soul cutters with her. After a while the defensive measures switched off, and the two young men clambered to a sitting position where they gave each other identical rueful looks. You know I wouldn't actually hurt you, right? Ichigo asked. Toshiro rubbed the bruise on his shoulder left by Zanjutsu. If that's what you call holding back, I don't regret not fighting you when you're serious. You've gotten stronger, Kurosaka-san. He waved a genial hand. Ah, that's no big deal. Just the power I used to have as a Vazard got reintegrated as Shinigami juice. My inner hollow was holding onto a whole ton of my potential strength. Now that it's gone I've got access to everything that was denied me before. Really? The boy captain raised a skeptical eyebrow. How did you manage that? Here the young man's face grew evasive. Well, that's complicated. But if you want to see the reason. And here he stood up, holding out his hand. Come to my place. We're having dinner. Hitsugaya accepted his help to rise with a small smile. That sounds nice. While their visit must have come as a surprise, nonetheless the servants responded with admirable alacrity. The palanquin was taken in hand, the men-at-arms as well, and the senior maid met them at the front door with grace and courtesy. Welcome to our home, noble lord and lady. We are doubly honored by this visit. She genuflected, and 2 or 3 maids behind her did the same. You can skip the kowtowing, I'm not a lady, Kyokaku Shiba growled, removing her white traveling cloak as she did. An attentive footman appeared out of nowhere to take it, and irritably she handed it off to him. A girl can hang up her own coat, you know. But to do so would be a discourtesy to the servants and the household they represent, Katsura Arashi said mildly as he divested himself of his own travel wear. The smile he wore managed to be both affectionate and smug at the same time, a trick which infuriated Kyokaku no end. And there is enough ill will in the world, wouldn't you agree? You've got an opinion about everything, she retorted. And you're never afraid to share it, you know that. What would be the point? He remarked. Humility. She snapped, flipping off her sandals in the vestibule. A manservant was already on hand to provide her with soft beautifully stitched slippers. With an embarrassed grimace she awkwardly permitted him to slip them on and went stomping by in a huff. "Let's just do this." The Tiger Lord smiled to himself as he followed suit, but only on the inside. Though the future no doubt held many surprises, one thing was certain: having Kyokaku Shiba as a wife would certainly teach him humility. "I've sent ahead to inform the master of your arrival," the major domo informed him as he arrayed himself accordingly. "Permit this one to escort you to him." Katsura passed by her without speaking, and the well-trained staff understood this to be consent. They came upon Kyokaku standing at an intersection with hand on hip, peering in frustration from one side to another. "This would be a lot easier if he was still a goddamn powerhouse," she grumbled at their approach. "This way, good lady," the old servant bowed. They followed her through the halls of a small yet extravagantly furnished manor. The paneled walls were bedecked with masterful paintings depicting charming young couples on mountainside picnics, garden parties with commingling guests of royal pedigree, and outdoor theater performances for both gods and emperors. Included on many of them was poetry whose stanzas held, shall we say, more than one interpretation, lending a rather lewd aspect to certain scenes. That charming young man, was he reaching to pour his charming young lady a drink, or to place his hand in her charming young bodice? Were those guests drawn apart throughout the garden commingling, or coupling? And what was that ONI on stage about to do with those lovely virgins he had captured? Perhaps best not to dwell on such matters too closely. They entered the private quarters of the manse and stopped at one door in particular. Katsura and Kyokaku waited at a discreet distance, him poised and aloof, her slumped against the wall and lighting her pipe while glancing restlessly around. The major domo coughed loudly before calling out in a somewhat exaggerated voice, "Kyokaku-sama? You have visitors." "Eep." The door whipped open, and a tiny maid came tearing out with a pillow over her head, nearly bowling over Lord Arashi before vanishing down the hall. Kyokaku watched her go with raised eyebrows, smoke curling lazily between her lips. Katsura frowned and simply brushed by the servant. "Lord Arashi. How, nice to see you." Kyokaku Shunsui, former captain of the Godi I-13, nobleman and living legend, scrambled hastily to his feet. He smoothed his hair back, adjusted his robe, patted down his trousers and bowed so outlandishly he risked pitching over. There was a joyous, somewhat nervous smile on his unshaved face as he came upright. "Please forgive my state of dress. I was simply..." He hesitated for half a breath, eyes raking the room strewn with books and pillows, teaching one of the servants how to read. "Yes, that's it. Nothing to sharpen the mind and whet the appetite for further learning like, ah." He quickly snatched up a book. Upon seeing the title, however, the handsome veteran's face paled, lips pressing together as though choking on a scream. "Th. The Way of the Soul Cutter, by B. Byakuya Kukaki." He gasped, every word a strangled torment bursting from his lips only under extreme duress. He proceeded to choke out the rest of the title. A.P. A precise and polite acknowledgement of past codices and personal reflections on the prospect of barehanded conso for able-bodied aspirants. The master of the manor spun about to hunch over with a heaving, retching noise. A vague whisper of, "Sweet heaven, he's so damn boring," could faintly be heard. He came slowly back around, wiping his trembling hand on the back of his mouth and looking visibly shaken. Sweat dappled his brow, and he seemed to have aged several years. More streaks of gray were visible in his soft, curly hair than had been before. "What can I do for you?" he inquired somewhat queasily. "We must speak, Kyokaku-sama," Katsura intoned in a soft voice. "The three of us." He glanced over one shoulder, and Kyokaku Shiba reluctantly shuffled forward, one arm shrugged out of her fine summer yukata and puffing on her pipe, a red gleam in her eyes. Upon seeing her, Shunsui appeared to drop any pretense. He stood up straight, face growing calm, and said in a grave voice so unlike him, "Bring tea for our guests." The servant left with a bow. Kyokaku indicated they should follow him into the hall, whereupon he then led the leaders of their clans to a nearby private audience chamber. He opened the door and stood aside for them to enter. Closing the pane, the oddly subdued hero shuffled over to sit cross-legged on the tatami mats. "My lord, my lady," he looked up at them, a sad, weary expression on his face, as though he knew what must come next. "I am at your service." They stood side by side, examining him. Kyokaka was chewing on her pipe, an indication that this long overdue meeting was not quite the simple affair she had initially insisted upon. For his part, Katsura remained close at hand, to offer support and, if necessary, intervene to prevent violence. She forgave me when I divulged the story of her father's death. But it was only recently that I told her the full truth of the matter. At last Kyokaka stopped smoking. She opened her mouth, hesitated, and then finally said, "You drugged my brother." Shunsui met her eye without flinching. "Yes." "And Miyako?" A new level of emotion made her voice harsh. "You drugged them both at a party so that they would sleep together." "Yes." There were tears in her eyes, whether from rage or grief. "And you did this because you knew he was secretly betrothed to Kian Kotetsu, and you wanted to destroy the engagement." "Yes." "To ruin our clan." "Yes." "And kill our father." "Yes." This sudden venomous hatred was the first emotion Kyoraku Shunsui had shown since she began questioning him. It gave Kyokaka pause. She looked to Katsura, who gave a small shake of his head. He had never asked, not once, why Captain Kyoraku Shunsui of the 8th Division had stooped to plot the murder of a fellow captain with him. They said nothing for a while, just stared at one another. In that time, a servant knocked on the door before entering with a teapot and 3 cups. She read the room and departed immediately after setting down her tray. When they were alone again, Kyokaku asked the only question left. "Why?" So Kyoraku took a deep breath, and told her. Fireflies blinked lazily over the grounds of a gorgeously maintained manor. In that fragrant nighttime setting, a servant knelt outside a screen door and spoke softly. "My lady, I have brought your son. Send him in." The door was opened, and the faithful maid smiled tearfully at her beautiful charge before nudging him forth. When he was inside, she shut the door behind him and fled. The girl walked away from that room trembling with terror. Rumors and whispers had run the gamut of late. Their lord was dead. He had taken his own life, or been dispatched in a hasty execution. The Kukaki were coming to kill them all. They would be sold off like livestock, or cast into the world of the living to eke out their remaining existence as shades, cursed beings without purpose or rest. The house of Takiyaku was doomed. She hesitated in a hallway, uncertain what to do. Then there came the sound of shouting from the main gate. Racing feet filled the corridors, accompanied by tearful begging and pleas for mercy. Figures in black robes came streaming over the rooftops. "I have to escape. They'll kill me. But the lady, and the young master. I have to warn them first." She raced out into the gardens, taking a shortcut back to the royal chambers. Fireflies bobbed away as she rushed past. "There. I see them." The servant ran straight into someone. When she looked up, all she saw was a black robe, and the white one over that. Before she could scream, a hand passed over her face, and she fell asleep. Captain Kyoraku Shunsui cradled the unconscious child against him. She, at least, would not have to remember what came next. The girl was safe now, hidden in the unbreachable enchantment he used to cloak his presence from all eyes. His own gaze returned to the open patio door, past which he saw Lady Manami Takiyaku in her private chambers, holding her babe Sosuke in what would be their final parting. The woman was drunk, that much he could tell. But for once, Shunsui himself remained completely sober. "I wish I could spare you this horror. But I can't. Thank you for the poem, Captain Kyoraku." The tiny bride-to-be reached out and took his big hand in her small ones. There was a tremulous smile on her face beneath the veil. It was a very amusing gift. "May it serve to help you on your wedding night," he murmured, and gave the blushing virgin beauty a gallant kiss on her fingers. Lord Kaito Takiyaku just frowned and looked away, permitting this legendary figure to do as he wished even now. Being the favored disciple of Commander General Yamamoto meant even the head of a great house would not risk incurring his wrath without good cause. And this was a day of celebration, after all. Not so today, Kyoraku reflected. From this point on, Manami's life would be ruined. Her own family would not accept her back after everything her husband and his kin stood accused of. She would die in disgrace. But Shunsui had already resolved not to let that happen. Though he could not disobey the commands of the king, this much he could accomplish. Lady Manamai would be accepted into his own household and looked after for the rest of her life. She need not fear dying alone in a gutter of the Rokanga, even if that proved small comfort after everything this night would cost her. Yamamoto had not asked him to participate in this night's slaughter. Kiraka would have had no choice but to openly defy him, and that would have led to the loss of his precious pupil, one way or another. Screams filled the night. Manamai had drifted into a drunken stupor, but this roused her. She leapt up and stumbled to the door, dragging Sosuke with her. Kiraka looked on, ashamed of his own cowardice. I should fight to stop this tragedy, die trying if I have to. They're killing children. Women and children and people who might never have even known what their lord was doing. And they're using Shinigami to do it. We're not supposed to be like this. We're meant to protect the weak, not. The door opened. Yode Shiba came in wearing his captain's cloak. They spoke briefly, then Manamai turned and raced for the garden, heading straight to where Shunsui watched hidden in the shadows. His heart grew cold at the abject terror on her face. Before she could make it outside, Shiba knocked her down. The noblewoman rose, but even as she did, Yode's sword. What is he? Stop. Too shocked to react in time, Kiraka could only watch as Manamai Takayaka was beheaded. It was Jushiro who had cried out against this injustice, but far too late. Both captains spoke angrily to one another, with Shiba arguing in defense of his crimes before striking off the child Sosuke's head and stalking out to continue his butcher's work. Yode had no idea how close he came to dying that night. There was blood in Shunsui's mouth, the taste hot and intoxicating. Blood in his eyes, turning them red, so that everything before him became a scarlet tapestry of death. Blood shed in his heart, as his hand reached for one of the swords at his waist. Kill them all, it seemed to whisper. Kill them all, I'll kill them all. The girl asleep in his arms moaned in pain at the strength of Shunsui's spasming grip. That sound drew the captain back from a precipice of bloodthirsty rage that threatened to swamp his reason, tempting his wicked soul with blackest murderous hate. Death will not wipe away your dishonor, Shunsui. Certainly not hers. Katen Kyakotsu's voice brought him back the remainder of the way. He gazed at that sleeping girl. An ordinary face, but alive. Still alive. Not if I leave her here to go on a bloodbath, though. So Kiraka slunk away from the sight of his greatest failure. Even as he did, though, black thoughts still swirled across his mind. I sacrificed my pride already, permitting this night to continue without so much as an objection to save face. But that, what happened back there, it won't go unpunished. Yode Shiba will not know a single night's rest from this day on. My disgrace pales next to his. I will find a way to turn everything he holds dear to ashes, leaving him in ruin. Only then will I permit him to die, choking on his own blood. And thus he began to lay his plans. I did it all to put your father in the ground where he belonged, Shunsui calmly reported after filling her in on the remaining details. So now you know. What comes next? Neither of his guests responded. Still, the veteran courtier slyly took note of the way Kyokaka was chewing on her pipe as though it was his liver, and couldn't resist a chuckle. You must have already had some idea before you even stepped through my door. Speak your mind, lady. I'm listening. We're getting married. For a moment Kiraka had the ridiculous notion she meant him with that statement, and there was a witty remark halfway to his lips before he caught himself. Now was not the time for jokes. His eyes darted between the two of them, and he cautiously replied, I wish you many happy years together. Save it, the Shiba Scion spat, eyes narrowed with malice. I understand why you did it. Our father committed a crime, and no one would punish him due to his rank. But because of what you did, we lost our mother. Father agreed to a divorce, but he wouldn't let her near us again, and she died of grief. That's on your head. And Miyako, Enkion. Here she took a deep breath, the fiery aura of a powerful soul burning around her, making it feel like he was staring face first into a blacksmith's blazing forge. Shunsui's mouth went dry from the force of that spirit. This must be what it felt like for other people facing off against me back in the day, he reflected. You abused the trust they put in you. You're a sick old man who poisoned our family because you were too cowardly and corrupt to fight for your own honor. They trusted you. Hell, they all loved you. And they never would have gotten married, were it not for you. This last part came as such a surprise he could only stare at her. Nobody knows what might have happened if Kian had married the Kotetsu princess, she continued in a shaky voice, swallowing down her grief and regret. Maybe they would have fallen in love eventually and made a long, happy life together. I can't say. But I do know that he and Miyako really loved one another. To the day they died. She shook her head in an angry effort to dash away any tears. That's your doing as well. As for me and Katsura. She turned a thoughtful, uncertain look on the iron-haired man beside her. I guess that's because of you too. Her future husband bowed his head in acknowledgement. I count myself fortunate. Yeah, write me a poem. He smirked, and the master engineer turned her attention back to Shunsui. We can list off all your hits and misses over the centuries to tally up your overall score, but I'm not into that shit. I already told this numbskull, and here she jerked a thumb at Arashi. What's done is done, and whatever grudges might have been held get buried now. Besides. Here she reached out one long leg and tapped the kneeling man twice in the chest. I think you got your comeuppance already. Phantom pain flowered in his seiketsu and hakyuzui, along with an ache that wasn't entirely in his mind. His gaze drifted sadly to the wall where Katen Kyokotsu, or what was left of her, rested in a stand. That loss was one he had never been willing to bear. He would have rather died than lose his oldest, dearest friend. Anohana probably knew that, when she tore us apart. One more of my old misdeeds coming back to haunt me. What I'm saying is, you're invited to our wedding. This certainly was a day for surprises. Taken aback, he turned to the two younger souls. Come again. We wish to start our new life together unencumbered by old dreads, Katsura informed him in a more diplomatic manner. Distasteful as our actions were, I cannot celebrate you for it, but neither will I disdain you for joining me in them. We should instead do our level best to assure the future dawns bright for all those under our protection. Whatever you might think of yourself now, I for one believe Kiraku Shunsui still has something to contribute to the world. I see, he murmured, lost in a haze of unlooked-for compassion. Hard to believe such a thing could exist after what I did. But the inescapable fact is standing right in front of me. That girl has forgiven me when I could not do the same for her father. The next generation really did turn out better than our own, in spite of everything we did. Or perhaps because of it, at the same time. Who can say? Not me. I am honored, truly honored, to attend your wedding. Here he couldn't resist himself, and his face broke out in the lazy, time-tested grin of a rake. Actually, if you're talking contributions, I have been known to jot off a little wedding ditty. A poem, to forever immortalize the bonds of love that bring two souls. Not interested. Kyokaku turned away, and Lord Arashi was just about to follow, when suddenly she halted, peering down at Shunsui with a slow-dawning smile that made him shiver. Actually, there is something I'd like to ask for our wedding gift. Name it, he replied, total sincerity in every inch of his bearing. That book you showed us before, the one that Byakuya wrote. And now her smile had turned positively demonic. I want you to read it out loud at our wedding party. In front of all the guests, the whole way through. From start to finish. Kiraku felt his blood run cold. Not that. Anything but that. Can't I just commit seppuku? He whispered, ashen-faced. No. Make sure to warm up your voice beforehand. Bye for now. With a toss of her sable locks, she strode from the room. For his part, Katsura bent down and took a quick sip of tea. Thank you for your hospitality, Kiraku-sama, he said with strict professional courtesy, bowing ever so slightly. Good day. They left the Lord of Wine and Poetry sitting on the floor, viewing a future that now stretched before him like a grey, windswept, boring plain. So much for burying the hatchet, he thought, and sadly shouldering his burden, he went to start the first day of the rest of his life. They stopped off at the Yosagi Shoten to pick up a jigai for him. The rest of the family had already departed, so there was no one to ask after this unusual occurrence. Toshiro came out of the room tugging on a sweater vest, short-sleeved dress shirt and corduroy pants that once belonged to the Golem Hinta. The only shoes were sandals, which took him back to how Shinigami used to dress. It was awkward walking through town, not the least because he hadn't worn a mortal form in 10 years. That and the sandals were nowhere near as comfortable as his own. Perhaps Ichigo noticed, for he walked slowly, not putting his long legs to full advantage. But at last he and Ichigo reached the Kurosaki home. "Hey, I move." Ichigo had just stepped into the house when a small object tackled him. Toshiro got a better look when he came inside. Clinging to the human's leg was a small girl in a sapphire dress and bare feet. She hopped up and down, giddy with joy, only to halt upon spying the new arrival. "Hirako, this is a friend of ours. His name is Toshiro Hitsugaya." Her father patted the girl's head and smiled at him. "My daughter, Hirako Kurosaki." Hitsugaya took note of this unassuming girl more than he would any other preschooler. She had inherited her mother's large eyes, which were so big he swore he could see himself reflected in them. The hair, on the other hand, came from Kurosaki, it being a tangled mess someone had wrestled into twin tails. The color was nowhere near as unusual as her father's red pelt, though, being more of a deep chestnut brown. Guess they split the difference on that. "Hello, Hirako-chan," he greeted her. Still holding onto her father's leg, the kid stuck her tongue out at him and looked away. "Give her time," Ichigo affirmed. "She'll get used to you." "But will I get used to her?" Hitsugaya had never been overly fond of children, even when he was one. Still, when in the real world, treat their brats as they would. They kicked off their shoes and followed the sound of animated conversation mixed with glasses, plates, and cutlery clattering. Entering the dining room found the relatively tiny space packed. In addition to Ichigo's father Ishine, another comrade from the war, there was Konpaku Shiba, the mortal girl Tatsuki Arisawa, two teenagers whom he assumed must be Ichigo's sisters, and Rukia Kukiki. The former lieutenant noticed his entry and broke away from setting the table with a glad smile. "Greetings, Hitsugaya-sama. I hope I'm not intruding." He shoved his hands into his pockets, feeling like a clown in this ridiculous get-up. By contrast, Rukia shone in a white lace top with either small roses or strawberries sewn into the collar, and a half-black half-tan leather skirt fastened with gray buttons. Her hair was tucked up in a clasp at the nape. She wore a purple and green paisley neckerchief along with small silver earrings. To his mild relief, she remained as short as he was. Although it seemed motherhood had worked its magic in some respects, if the contents of her shirt were anything to judge by. Thankfully, before he could reflect too much on that observation and its implications, the lady came to take his hands. "You are always welcome," she insisted warmly. "And Yuzu never fails to make more food than is needed, in case guests drop by. Which is fortunate. We weren't expecting quite this many." "Ah, young Toshiro." Ishine spread his arms wide and came striding over like he intended to envelop the captain in a hug. To his immense relief, that did not prove to be the case, as he simply clapped the small Shinigami on the shoulders. "Look at you. I dare say you'll tower over all of us one day." Ichi-nii. One of the teenagers, he wasn't sure which, came over to them drying her hands on a dish towel. "Is this one of your students?" "Yes, dear Yuzu." Her father clapped his hands delightedly. "You got it in one. Out of the park, that's my daughter for you. Toshiro Hitsugaya, meet my lovely youngest child Yuzu." He moved to stand behind the captain, pushing him towards the curly-haired girl and bending down to whisper in his ear, "She's available, so you know." "It's wonderful to meet you, Hitsugaya-kun," Yuzu smiled in a way that was almost maternal. It reminded him of his trip to visit Granny recently. "Will you be staying for dinner with us? Do you need to call your parents?" The well-earned affront he felt at this tactless comment was subsumed with an effort. This must be the daughter who didn't know about the afterlife. In that case she probably mistook him for a middle schooler. "It's fine," he nodded. "I can stay." "Thank you." "Good. All right, we need one more seat at the table. Karen-chan." "On it." The other daughter walked by, throwing both Toshiro and her brother a dubious look. A few seconds later she came back, carrying not only a chair, but a small boy sitting happily atop it. "Look what I found!" Karen exclaimed, and the tyke laughed. He hopped down, only then spotting Hitsugaya, and stood staring. "Your hair is white. Are you a ghost?" While certainly not an odd question considering his natural state, Toshiro found himself flustered on how to proceed. The boy just regarded him as though actually expecting an answer. He wore dark dress pants and a white button-up shirt. His black hair was fine and straight, lustrous as his mother's. It fell to his shoulders while being swept to one side across the brow, which was an unusual look for a child this young. It made him resemble a small adult. His face was more like Ichigo, with narrow brown eyes and somewhat sharp features for his age. But he differed in the open, friendly smile he wore. A definite improvement over his sister. "Toshiro's someone I know from work," the boy's father came to his rescue. He then looked around. "Now how do we arrange seating? They better not put me at the kids' table," the Leopard Company captain thought darkly. As it turned out, there was no such thing. They all ate at two dinner tables pushed together. Kon was sandwiched between Tatsuki and Karen, while Hitsugaya got Rukia on one side and Ichigo on the other, each taking one of the kids to boot. Ishine sat at the head across from Yuzo. Hirako was 3, but old enough to sit at the table, though she fidgeted and looked all around, trying to see everyone at once. It occurred to him that Nanao Ise wasn't present, which was odd. He had thought she lived here, or at least worked in the family clinic. Perhaps she was looking into something else? One less thing to worry about. Whether blessing or curse, you do seem to draw the ladies' attention. That's just their maternal instincts. Indeed, motherhood might be what they have in mind concerning you. He chose to let that comment slide, and they settled in to eat. The dinner proved loud, boisterous, and completely unlike what he was used to. To make matters worse, it was absolutely delicious, so he had no reason or even inclination to excuse himself. Instead he wound up crossing chopsticks with Arisawa over the last dumpling, and struggling to resist thirds on the soup, which warmed him more than he dared admit. Though Hitsugaya spoke little, aware of being the odd man out in this arrangement and not wanting to field any more questions about his status, he did not feel excluded. Kon at least knew how to steer the conversation away from dangerous waters, and Rukia certainly made him feel like part of the family. Stuffed to the gills and almost about to burst, he watched the two grown Kurosaki men argue and Yuzo playing peekaboo with the giggling Hirako using her napkin, while Kon seemed to have his hands full dividing his attention between Karen and Tatsuki. The house was warm, the topics mundane and carefree. It felt rowdy, yet strangely wholesome. Like some of the more boisterous divisions in Seoul society. Hitsugaya had a sip of water and peered curiously about. So this is what being in a big family feels like? Throughout his whole life, he had never experienced anything remotely similar. He had always been ostracized, by the villagers of the first ring, by his classmates at the academy, and to a lesser but noticeable extent by the other Shinigami after attaining his captaincy. Truly peaceful, fulfilling moments like this were rare. As if waiting for that thought, he suddenly remembered the winter night he had spent watching the stars with Momo, Rangiku, and Aizen. He's always with me. I feel like he's watching, even now. You're the only captain he wanted dead for sure. He had never forgotten Momo's words back when she had him at her mercy. That admission was telling, because it made no sense. Why would Aizen consider me a threat so great that I had to be eliminated? More than Kurosaki, or the Kenpei, or even Yamamoto. What made him single me out for execution? Or could it have nothing to do with strength? Is there something between us I'm not aware of? When the time comes, will we face each other alone? Dinner ended with dessert, but by then Toshiro had lost his appetite. He wandered off to the den and sat on a couch, brooding. Should I offer to help clean up? I don't want to put a damper on their festivities. All the same, it still feels like I'm being watched. He turned to get up, and something ducked behind the couch arm. Actually, it seems I am. Hitsugaya waited patiently. A few moments later, a small head peeked up once again. Two big childish eyes regarded him before ducking back down. He heard a giggle. She's playing with you. He glanced behind him to find the older twin Karen had come padding up, an affectionate smile on her face. She looked much more relaxed when dealing with her niece than she had been over dinner. "How do I play?" he asked her. "Are you serious?" His earnestness only earned him a skeptical and somewhat disparaging look. "Well, seems you and I are both watching the kids, so. Lesson number 1, it's not as hard as you think." With that she hopped over the back and sat beside him, holding very still. As Toshiro watched, the little set of peepers came up again, and immediately Karen whipped her head around. "Boo!" A delighted shriek followed, and Hirako disappeared. After a while, though, she made another appearance. This time Karen indicated it was Hichuga's turn. Feeling just a little out of his depth, he leaned forward slowly to get a better look, then turned his head very fast. "Boo!" Another glad squeal as the child dove out of sight. "I did it," he thought, feeling a touch of pride. "Thanks for the help," he told Karen. "Don't get overconfident," she supplied back. "We're only just getting started." Apparently entertaining kids demanded a great deal of one's attention as well as the patience of a saint. Repetition was the norm, at least where tiny Hirako was concerned. She seemed willing to play the same games for hours on end. While new to dealing with children, thanks to coaching from Karen, Toshiro managed to pick up some basic skills. Kids love to be chased, but even when caught, they still insist on running around again. Hide and seek only had rules until one player became too excited and couldn't be bothered to remember them. And apparently peekaboo was the single funniest thing ever, especially if you added strange faces to the mix. It took Toshiro a while to realize that the boy Shinobu, or Jaku as most of them called him, was nowhere to be seen. For some reason that felt wrong, and so while Karen was engaged in a lightning round of tickle war, he went off to check on the lad. Being excluded from games was something he had long familiarity with. If at all possible, he wouldn't want to see another child go through more of the same. And then the big worm goes, "You go soft, again, and the giant runs at it, and the bald man runs at it, and the robot man, he doesn't run at it, but then a kitty falls down and it goes blush." Jaku was the center of attention in his own way, enthralling his audience with a story of some kind. "Did you say blush?" His Aunt Yuzo gasped in feigned shock and looked at Tatsuki for confirmation, who snorted while wearing a bemused smile. "Blush?" the little boy repeated. And it went everywhere, and the robot turned back into a man, and he tripped and fell, and seems there was no need to worry. He had them well in hand. As he thought this, Toshiro felt a small hand seize his own. Looking down he found Hirako, still clearly high on this new person in her life. "Do you want me to come with you?" the captain asked seriously, to which she nodded with great vigor. "Oh, well. Duty calls." Rukia and Ichigo came in to watch their play after a while, and then there was nothing but for them to join in too at their daughter's insistence. Lady Rukia of the noble house of Kukaki made faces that would have caused her brother Byakuya to faint from disgrace, while Ichigo consented to be a horse, carrying his delighted son around the living room. The father Ishine came somersaulting in and challenged his eldest to a push-up match while each held one of the kids on their backs, which Ichigo was forced to accept. He lost, but only because his knee gave out at a crucial moment. Tatsuki proceeded to show them both up by surpassing their records with both kids riding her shoulder blades, Shinobu holding an overjoyed Hirako in place to keep her from falling off. Hichuga sat back and watched the evening's merriment continue. After a while the children were clearly nodding off, but Ishine would hear nothing about their parents taking them home. Instead he pulled out a futon and piled it with pillows and blankets, where brother and sister soon lay asleep. Meanwhile the adults convened in the kitchen for a conference, while the kids, which included Toshiro and the twins, were left to entertain themselves. "I know what we can do," Yuzu exclaimed merrily. "No, Yuzu, not that," her sister groaned, but the chipper teen had already dashed off to find something. She turned a pained look on Hichuga and ran a hand through her hair. "Sorry about this." "I can't wait," he deadpanned. She stole a cautious look around before scooting closer to him. Any concern about what this might portend was dispelled when the stern-faced young woman fixed him with a knowing look. "So you're one of the heavy hitters, huh?" she murmured. Which division? Leopard, he affirmed. Formerly the 10th. So, it's been a few years since we heard anything. Not since that witch attacked my brother. I sometimes forget they're even out there. Karen studied him strangely. Do you? I can't. Acting on impulse, he turned and lifted his shirt slightly, allowing her to see the scar running across his back. They marked me too. Huh. She made a move to touch him, hesitated, then drew back. You know, I think I met your old lieutenant a few times. She's the busty blonde, right? The one nobody knows what she's thinking. Toshiro was about to contradict her, only to realize after a moment that this probably described Rangiku Matsumoto as well as possible. She had been the first woman to truly make him question his worth and sanity. Nowadays that number was nowhere near in danger of falling short. Hope this girl doesn't turn out to be another one. Last time we met, she offered to train me. Or kill me. I'm not quite certain how to think of her anymore. Yeah. She cast a look over her shoulder, frowning at something behind them. I know the feeling. Before he could continue, Karen turned back to him. Anyway, thanks for helping with the kids. You're pretty good with them, once they warm up to you. You certainly don't have that problem. What's it like being someone's aunt? I've only got the word of that head case Noboru Shihoin to judge by, and he worships the ground his aunt walks on. It's wild, she admitted. I was scared at first, because I didn't know what it meant. But just being with them, as they learn all the stuff we take for granted? It's watching a new person come into the world, but more important than anyone else, you know? They're the ones you're determined to protect, no matter what it costs. And you want them to be happy when they see you. Kind of like being in love, I guess. He had never heard that description before, but once again, it fit. There was no time for further deliberation on the topic, as Yuzo came racing back in. She had on a gaudy Middle Eastern turban, of all things, with a sparkling cloak flung around her shoulders and clutching a deck of cards. Tarot cards, the high school senior explained. With these, I shall interpret your future, Hitsuga-kun. She seated herself before them, adopting a somber look that was belied by her outlandish get-up. Choose 4 cards to begin with, to learn your fate. She makes up her own rules, Karen mock whispered, causing her sister to level a frosty glare at her, to which she shrugged dismissively. Respect the powers that be, Karen-chan. And she spread the cards face down in front of him. Ever eager to oblige, the captain selected a few at random. Yuzu reverently withdrew each after every selection and laid them out. One by one she began to turn them over. First we have the Empress, a mother figure, symbolizing birth, but also uncertainty, for women are very mysterious. She flashed a wicked smile at Toshiro, making him wonder which of these girls was actually more dangerous to the opposite sex. Next we find the lovers, who conquer the odds in order to be together, like Orpheus and his great love. This brought a snort of disbelief from Karen. She cast another glance over her shoulder as Kon and Ichigo raised their voices, only to be quieted by Rukia and Tatsuki. Yuzo continued. Third card is Judgment, Rebirth. Very interesting. And lastly, you chose Death. As if anticipating a bad reaction from him she quickly added, but don't worry, Hitsuga-kun. It's not meant to be taken literally. He is the Pale Rider, trampling the fallen ruler as it shows on the card, for even kings must bow to him. He symbolizes the breaking of bonds that hold us together, or does he set us free? Her voice had sunk to a cryptic whisper. Nonetheless, for all the stage drama, the captain couldn't help but feel a bit unnerved by this arcane display. So is that all? Not quite. I will now draw the final card myself. She reshuffled the deck, paused to gather her mystic energies, or just to heighten the tension, and pulled out a card. Upon turning it over, the fair-haired seer frowned. Oh, the Empress again, but reversed. Truth and resolution of doubt. Perhaps this means your questions will all be answered. You don't have a test coming up in school, do you, Hitsuga-kun? No, I already made it into the academy I wanted, he responded back with a knowing smile. Well, anyway, thank you for playing. Now Karen, it's your turn. Wonderful, her older sister groused, but consented to go along with what she clearly thought was a bunch of hocus pocus. For his part, Toshiro Hitsugaya considered what the concepts spelled out here meant to him. A mother figure, well, he had just visited Granny. She certainly counted. Beating the odds? I can think of several people who might qualify for that. Ranjika leapt out at him for obvious reasons, and he tried to shake an ill presentiment. That woman could charm the king of hell. Then rebirth could mean anything. And death? Well, I am a death god, so that only makes sense. He considered this last one more thoroughly. Breaking bonds, here I was just thinking about what strange twist of fate bound me to Aizen. Were we brothers in a past life? And that last one, the queen who dispels all doubt. Maybe I'll get to meet the queen of Soul Society one day? Women supposedly love me, after all. As he thought this, someone ruffled his snowy hair. The Shinigami stiffened, then threw a sour look at the suddenly smiling Swami across from him. Sorry, Yuzo laughed. I couldn't help myself. You remind me so much of a boy who used to work at Rukia-Nisan's shop. I haven't seen him in forever. But really, thanks for participating in my little séance. Oh. That reminds me. The girl sprang up to go racing into the kitchen. Hitsugaya watched her leave with ill grace. If she tries to give me a bag of candy, I swear. That did not prove to be the case. Yuzo came tumbling back holding something in her hands, which she thrust out to him. Here. You can have this. When he saw what she carried, he nearly jerked back in shock. Astonished, the captain looked up at the smiling teen. What? Don't let its looks fool you, she insisted. It's a good luck charm. My brother gave it to me years ago, for protection. It's meant to warn you if evil spirits are in the area. I never had reason to test it myself, because ghosts don't seem to want anything to do with me. But you have white hair. You must have all kinds of spiritual attraction. This will keep you safe. She sounded so wholesome, so innocent. Toshiro had no reason to doubt her sincerity. Just his own. Held in her hands was the so-called substitute Shinigami badge the Godi 13 had given Ichigo years ago. The same treacherous charm he himself helped enchant to bind the unwitting human's hollow inside him if he ever re-entered Soul Society. The broken mask carved on the talisman stared back at him. Feeling a chill, he nonetheless accepted this macabre token. Thanks, he managed with a sickly smile. I'll keep hold of it. Karen appeared doubtful, but Yuzu accepted his words with good grace before launching into another idea of how they could entertain themselves. She collected the tarot cards, spreading them out for a second so they could admire all of them. For some reason Hitsugaya focused on the third card he chose, Judgment. It seemed appropriate, especially now. So it was meant to signify rebirth? Hitsugaya considered the cursed item he held, then chanced a look over to the dining room, where Ichigo was emphasizing something to Tatsuki with finger raised. The kid's soul poured forth with more intensity than ever. Anyone who might have known him from before the Autumn War would have found it hard to believe a soul that powerful could become so much stronger. But since the birth of his child and the defeat of his inner hollow, that certainly proved to be the case. Strength that might even be enough to challenge a Vastolord now existed in that boy. The conversation they had earlier came back to him. The potential for a hollow exists in every soul not purified by a Kinso. That untapped spiritual strength was the same one Aizen Sosuke needed the Hogyaku for to unleash in himself and his allies, making them absurdly powerful. I don't have a Hogyaku. But I might have the next best thing. Once more Toshiro regarded the broken symbol in his palm. A mask worn by a Shinigami, and they're not officially part of the Godi 7. More like freelance agents. Think it's time I paid a call on our old colleagues, the masked army. The Vazard were about to get a visit. To be continued. Check the description for the links to the author.